A spacecraft is departing from Earth with another group of settlers headed for Mars. One of the passengers convinces her daughter to wave goodbye to the planet as they will be apart for a very long time. The well-established route consists of 2 stages. The shuttle docks with the Aniara, a huge spaceship that has everything for comfortable living. And after 3 weeks, it delivers the passengers to the colonized planet. A young woman named Emily Grant on the ship serves as a Mimarobe, a guide to the world of Mima, the system that allows one to delve into their memories and visions so that the brain does not get bored with the repetitive space scenery. Emily herself loves to remember her walks in the forest, and the visions even allow her to feel her bare feet stepping on the moss. A new neighbor is added to Emily's room, an adult female astronomer. From the huge monitors, the astronomer tells the passengers about the delights of Aniara and that the ship has everything to keep from getting bored: shopping centers, restaurants, and even nightclubs. If desired, during the journey, one can work in the water purification department or the seaweed factory, which is necessary for oxygen production. The company pays points which serve as currency for this work. Emily gathers another group for Mima sessions. In the visualization room, there is silence as the Mimarobe lays people down on the floor, face down on a special pillow, and launches the system. The glowing screen shimmers with different colors, not showing any pictures. But if the Mimarobe needs to know the visions of a specific visitor, she uses a special remote control. Suddenly, an emergency situation occurs on the ship, and the whole group slides to the corner of the room. The passengers exit their cabins in panic to find out what happened. They gather in a large hall where the captain is supposed to make a live broadcast. After gathering his strength, the man makes an announcement. There has been a system failure on the Aniara, and the ship has lost all fuel and drifted off course. The crew believes that it's not a big deal and that by using the gravity of celestial bodies, they will be able to return to Earth. However, the journey will now take a little over 2 years instead of the promised 3 weeks. The outraged passengers disagree with this plan, worrying about their plans without even realizing what lies ahead. Austerity measures are introduced on the ship, but the crew realizes that the supplies will not be enough in any case. At best, there is only enough food for a couple of months. One of the crew members suggests growing algae more actively, which will help them survive. The first 3 weeks of confinement in space pass. The people still don't lose their optimism, but they're already starting to get bored. The Mima becomes the most popular hole as everyone wants to see more than just the infinite universe outside the window, and Emily can't handle it, so she asks the captain for help. In addition, the girl is going through a personal drama, hoping to resume her relationship with one of the crew members, Isabel. Emily asks her neighbor how long it would take to reach the nearest celestial body so that the ship can turn around. The woman initially avoids answering, but then admits that in her opinion all of this is hopeless. There are no points that could help them. The crew just doesn't know how to tell the passengers about it. After hearing this, the Mimarobe has a panic attack and runs to her hole to immerse herself in memories of Earth, and also to drink in secret so that the commander would know. That journey has been going on for 3 years already. The people have settled into life on the ship, having come to terms with the length of the flight. Emily goes to a party where she meets Daisy and they decide to alleviate their loneliness together. When the couple retreats to a corridor, Isabel walks by and gives Daisy a cold glance, making it impossible for her to relax. There aren't enough people on the ship to work with the algae and water purification systems. Even young passengers are now being recruited, but the systems can't keep up, and all the drinks have an unpleasant sulfide smell. Strange things also start happening in the ship's hull as the system malfunctions, and Mima, using human language, begs to stop as it can no longer handle passing through people's memories. One of the people lying on the floor starts thrashing around in hysteria, and when Emily connects her remote to him, she sees very unpleasant images in his head. The Mimarobe turns to the ship's captain, asking him to let the system rest, but he believes that this is the passenger's only outlet and denies her request. Furthermore, he reprimands the girl for driving customers out of the session. During the next session, Mima repeats its words, and at some point the laser screen begins to crumble, finally stopping the system's operation. The customers are dissatisfied and blame the Mimarobe entirely. The people gather at the door to the hall to hold a memorial for Nima, and the management accuses Emily of what happened. They catch the girl and punish her severely, after which they imprison her along with Isabel, who tried to defend her friend before the management. On the ship, a series of nervous breakdowns with fatal consequences begins, and the commander has no choice but to release everyone who is under guard to take up workstations. Dead bodies are sent into open space as the ship is not equipped to store them. Isabel is sent to work in the logistics department, and Emily returns to teaching, this time with the task of educating the children on board, focusing on space sciences that could help them with their return. During their time in confinement, the Mimorobe and Isabel developed a relationship, so they move in together once they're free. Communities and groups emerge on the ship, each praying in their own way for a return and rescue. At one of the gatherings of a cult-like group, they invite the girls, as Emily was associated with Mima. In a dark room, the friends first become witnesses and then participants in love games, after which Isabel becomes pregnant. The girl falls into depression, fearing that her indulgence will bring another hostage into the situation, but Emily supports her with all her might. She even plans to make a light screen that would replace the dark picture outside the window with earthly landscapes, but the captain forbids wasting resources on such foolishness. The couple has a healthy boy who grows very quickly, but Isabel can't shake the feeling that she shouldn't have done it. While bathing with his son in the pool, she almost commits a terrible act, but fortunately she's distracted by a message from the captain, who urgently invites his former assistant to a meeting. It becomes revealed that after 6 years of travel, a flying machine has finally been detected, and a meeting with it will take place in about a year. Isabel measures the approximate size of the object and understands that it is unlikely to be a rescue ship, but everyone hopes that they will be able to obtain fuel from it to return to their route. Emily comes to the team to be with her girlfriend at such an important moment. The captain joyfully announces the discovery to the passengers, hoping to boost their morale, which he manages to do. To celebrate the occasion, a party is held on the ship, complete with drinks and leftover delicious food. As usual, the commander tries to present himself in the best light by claiming credit for the team's achievements. Throughout the year, everyone diligently trains to release probes and dock, and by the appointed time, everyone is fully prepared for the operation. The docking operation goes perfectly, and the giant space probe is placed in the ship's cargo hold for examination to determine if it contains any fuel and how radioactive it has become during its time in space. The son of Emily and Isabel is growing up, and the couple now has hope that he will see Earth. Due to a lack of peers, the boy is not developing well and hardly speaks. It is not possible to determine the chemical composition of the object because the study methods on the ship are outdated, but work is constantly being done. The captain declares that he does not consider it a mistake to give people hope, as it has brought stability to many. The roommate of Emily gets drunk at the bar and becomes too candid, causing panic to break out on the ship again. The captain takes notice of this and gets rid of the troublemaker at the first opportunity, even sending her body into open space but allowing for a memorial service for Emily. After taking an exhilarating pill, Emily goes to the bar where she meets Daisy and his friends again. The group has a fun time, but another accident occurs on the ship. An unknown object explodes and damages the equipment. Those who were working on the probe in the cargo hold at the time are lost forever. Upon inspection of the damage, the captain orders them to be disposed of while saving any useful clothing. Meanwhile, the Mimorobe returns home and asks Isabel for forgiveness, and it seems that everything is returning to a peaceful state. However, during the conversation, Emily realizes that her friend has developed mental disorders. After putting her son to bed, Emily shares her achievements at work with Isabel. The two women have a nice chat, and Emily is not worried about anything. Wishing her friend a good night, Emily leaves to finally connect the light screen she has long dreamed of creating. Everything works perfectly, and the remaining passengers on the ship marvel at the earthly landscapes with waterfalls and forests outside the window. As she listens to the words of gratitude, Emily plans to create new pictures. Emily runs to her cabin to hear the opinion of her family. She opens the door with the key, but it doesn't budge. Emily tries to fix the lock several times, but then realizes that something is blocking it from the inside. With effort, she finds a belt from a rope on the door handle, and Isabel is nearby. Coming to her senses a few seconds later, Emily runs to her son's room, but there she's met with a terrible sight. It's the 10th year of the journey. The captain gathers the few remaining passengers in the main hold and presents Emily with an award for creating the light screen. As she receives the medal from the commander, the young woman notices traces of a nervous breakdown on his wrist. Giving a speech, the captain tries to appear heroic in this situation and suggested they should be proud that they have gone farther than anyone has gone before. On the 24th year of the journey, only a few people remain alive. Old and wrinkled Emily leads a meeting of the survivors where they pray for strength to be sent to them. The ship has long been powerless and is floating in space like a piece of space junk. And almost 6 million years later, the spacecraft Aniara approaches an unknown planet in the constellation of Lyra. The movie begins by introducing us to the young protagonist, Vesper, who lives in a dystopian world sharply divided between the privileged elites and the struggling masses. The elite reside in secure, enclosed cities known as citadels, while the rest of humanity faces the challenges of survival in harsh conditions. In this world, the key to sustenance is unique seeds provided by the citadels. These seeds are genetically coded to yield just a single harvest, ensuring a constant dependency on the citadels. For more, Vesper, amidst her struggle for survival in this harsh environment, shares her existence with her paralyzed father, Darius, a former army serviceman. Ingeniously, Darius's consciousness has been transferred into a drone, enabling him to accompany and communicate with his daughter as she navigates their dangerous world. Vesper is not only resourceful and brave, venturing out daily to forage, but she also possesses a keen understanding of biology and biohacking. However, their lives take a dramatic turn when Vesper returns home one afternoon to discover they've been robbed. The generator powering their home, including the critical machine sustaining Darius, has been sabotaged. Faced with no other choice to save her father, Vesper sets out to seek help from a neighboring farm. Upon arrival at the farm, Vesper encounters a troubling scene. The farm faces its own challenges with a jug, a genetically engineered human designed for labor, but devoid of intelligence. The jug has been injured, rendering it useless, and Jonas, the farm's leader and Darius's brother, instructs a young boy to kill it. After witnessing this unsettling event, Vesper approaches Jonas with a request for bacteria to restore their generator. In exchange, she offers a blood donation, a valuable commodity used by Jonas to trade for seeds from the citadels. Jonas expresses a desire for her to join their community, offering to care for her father as well. Vesper, however, is deeply unsettled by Jonas's intentions. She suspects that Jonas wants to use her as a breeder, a role she strongly rejects. After completing her blood donation, Vesper faces a dire situation when Jonas refuses to immediately provide the bacteria she needs in exchange. He explains that he must first sell the blood, a process that will take several days, time her father Darius does not have. In desperation and anger, Vesper attempts to reclaim her blood, only to be caught and forcefully expelled from the farm by Jonas. Undeterred, Vesper returns to the farm, exploiting a secret entry point known only to her. Vesper stealthily enters Jonas's lab and retrieves the bacteria she is owed. While there, she also manages to take some seeds acquired from the citadel. As Vesper heads home, she promptly repairs the generator and begins experimenting with the stolen seeds, hoping to unlock their fertility. In the forest, Vesper stumbles upon Camellia, a woman from the citadel, lying unconscious yet alive, with plants feeding off of her. Vesper acts quickly, clearing the plants and bringing Camellia back to their home, where she treats her wounds. Camellia then reveals that she was in the crashed glider Vesper had seen and is now desperately searching for her father, who is with her. Although not fully recovered, Camellia promises a reward for their help. Vesper agrees to assist in the search, despite Darius's objections. The following morning, Vesper sets out on her mission and soon locates the crashed glider, finding Camellia's father Elias inside. However, she's not alone in this discovery. Jonas and a group of survivalists also converge on the crash site. Jonas, cold and indifferent to Elias's pleas, decides to end his life simply because he is from the citadel. When Vesper attempts to intervene, Jonas dismissively shoves her aside. He also uncovers a woman's scarf in the glider, deducing that another passenger Camellia needs to be found. Back home, Darius suggests informing the Citadel of the situation before Camellia takes any drastic action or Jonas finds her. However, the only way to communicate with the Citadel is through a transceiver located at Jonas's house. Vesper reluctantly agrees to the plan, lying to Camellia that her search was fruitless, but promising to continue the next day. After a while, Camellia earns Vesper's trust. Vesper then decides to reveal her secret greenhouse. This greenhouse is a testament to Vesper's ingenuity, housing a variety of bioengineered plants, each with unique abilities and characteristics. Vesper takes pride in her creations, but still hopes to develop a plant capable of producing edible seeds. While Vesper tends to her plants, Darius quietly confides in Camellia. He admits he knows they can never gain access to a Citadel, but implores her to be kind, as Vesper's dream of reaching the Citadel means everything to her. Later, Vesper questions why they are excluded from the Citadel, to which Camellia explains the leadership's fear of resource scarcity. Vesper suggests they could take on the worst jobs, but Camellia points out the Citadel's preference for control. Unlike humans, the genetically engineered laborers, or jugs, don't resist. That evening, they share a musical moment, with Vesper singing while Camellia plays her mother's old instrument. The next day, Vesper once again sneaks into Jonas's house to use the transceiver. This time, however, Jonas spots Darius's drone and seizes it. While pretending to repair the drone, Jonas confronts Vesper about the missing seeds and the unidentified passenger, expressing his hatred for liars, especially within his own family. Vesper, refusing to admit anything, snatches the drone and flees, only to find it can't fly and crashes. In her attempt to recover the drone, Vesper stumbles upon a grim sight: the body of Jonas's assistant, who helped here before, left to die under a tree. Before she can process whether he was killed for aiding her, Jonas's followers apprehend her. They forcefully mark her hand with a seal, symbolizing her as Jonas's property. Distraught and overwhelmed, Vesper returns home, where Camellia immediately offers comfort. Guilt-ridden by her own deceit, Vesper breaks down and confesses to Camellia that Elias is dead. In a moment of stark revelation, Vesper decides to show Camellia the truth by taking her to see her father Elias's body, now tragically floating in the river. The sight overwhelms Camellia, leading to an intense emotional breakdown. She clings desperately to her father in grief, forcing Vesper to intervene and pull her from the river. During this intense moment, Vesper notices an unusual scar on Camelia's back that reacts peculiarly to her touch. This discovery leads to a shocking truth. Camellia is not a human, but a highly advanced jug, a creation of Elias, who was expelled from the Citadel for creating an intelligent slave. Camellia confesses her deception. She had been on the run and never had the capability to get Vesper and Darius into the Citadel. Angered by this betrayal, Vesper confronts Camellia physically before they return home. Once there, Vesper coldly tells Camellia to leave after she cleans up. Meanwhile, Vesper repairs the drone and shares the day's events with Darius. Darius, understanding the complex situation, urges Vesper to be more compassionate towards Camellia, explaining that jugs are bound to their programming and have no real choice in their actions. At the same time, Camellia, grappling with her lost purpose and fearing capture by the Citadel, contemplates ending her life. However, Vesper, influenced by her father's words, intervenes just in time. Realizing Camelia's potential contribution to her research, Vesper proposes to use a sample of Camelia's cells. The process proves challenging, as Camelia's cells are secured just like the Citadel's seeds. In an attempt to ease Vesper's frustration, Camellia plays music. Miraculously, the music unlocks Camelia's cells, allowing Vesper to modify the Citadel seeds successfully, creating a sustainable food source. And all it took was a little nickelback. Needing more supplies for further research, Vesper briefly leaves for the old lab with the drone. During her absence, Camellia stays to watch over Darius, which leads to a dangerous encounter when Jonas arrives. Initially, Camellia tries to feign innocence, but Jonas sees through her act and threatens threatens Darius's life, Camellia agrees to go with Jonas without resistance. However, Jonas soon discovers the mark on her back, identifying her as a jug, and attempts to reprogram her to obey him. Vesper returns just in time, and a fierce struggle ensues, with Vesper, the drone, and Camellia fighting against Jonas. They manage to overpower him, but Vesper refuses to kill him. Instead, she strikes a deal. She will share the secret of the fertile seeds with Jonas if he agrees not to alert the Citadel. Despite Jonas's apparent agreement, he betrays them by contacting the Citadel and revealing Camellia's location. As night falls and Vesper completes her work on the seeds, their moment of triumph is cut short. Darius's drone detects an external threat, signaling the Citadel's approach. A weird organism invades their home, releasing a toxic substance. Darius, with his military background, quickly recognizes the danger and instructs Vesper and Camellia not to breathe until the threat subsides. Camellia, feeling responsible for the imminent danger, offers to surrender herself to protect Vesper and Darius. However, Darius refuses to let her sacrifice herself, knowing the Citadel will pursue Vesper regardless. Instead, he devises a plan to distract the soldiers, giving Vesper and Camellia a chance to escape. Vesper is initially reluctant to leave her father behind in the face of the impending threat from the Citadel's soldiers. However, Darius persuades her to take cover nearby, assuring her that he will handle the situation. He plans to tell the soldiers that there is no jug present, drawing on his experience as a former army man to communicate effectively with them. As the soldiers approach, their first stop is Jonas's farm, where they eliminate him and his group. Meanwhile, Vesper and Camellia take painstaking efforts to make Darius's home appear abandoned. They cover everything up and take the valuable, unlocked seeds with them as they hide in the forest. Unbeknownst to Vesper, her father's actual plan is to sacrifice himself by self-destructing the drone, hoping to take the soldiers down with him. From their hiding spot in the forest, Vesper witnesses the explosion and, driven by desperation, tries to rush back to aid her father. Camellia, recognizing the danger of this action, stops her, reminding her that it's too late to do anything for Darius. Their situation worsens when two soldiers, having survived the explosion, start pursuing them. Vesper leads Camellia through a swamp, aware that it is filled with dangerous plants that could potentially eliminate their pursuers. Their tactic proves effective, as the first soldier falls victim to one of these lethal plants. The second soldier, however, learns from his comrade's fate and cautiously avoids the same trap. Vesper and Camellia, in an attempt to remain undetected, crawl on their knees and hide behind bushes. Unfortunately, another plant betrays their position with a noise, alerting the soldier to their location. Facing imminent danger, Vesper and Camellia decide to take the offensive. They attack the soldier, seize his weapon, and manage to force him into the deadly plant's trapping zone, resulting in his death. The distant sound of approaching gliders signals more danger. Realizing that the Citadel will never cease their pursuit as long as she is with Vesper, Camellia makes a difficult decision. She understands that Vesper and the precious seeds will always be in danger as long as she remains. Despite Vesper's protests, Camellia gently puts her to sleep and conceals her under fallen leaves before surrendering to the soldiers. The next morning, Vesper awakens to find her home reduced to ashes. She plants some of the unlocked seeds in the remnants of her old garden, a symbol of hope and renewal. In the aftermath, she encounters a group of children who survived the attack on Jonas's farm. Together, they decide to follow the mysterious people that wander around, seeking to uncover their destination. Their journey leads them to a towering structure constructed by these people. Driven by a sense of purpose, Vesper climbs to the top of the tower. There, she releases the seeds from her hand, allowing the wind to carry them to various corners of the land. This symbolic act represents her hope that the seeds will grow and multiply, providing sustenance for all. The movie concludes on this note, leaving a lasting impression of resilience and the enduring power of hope. Every day, a young fisherman named Syracuse sets out to fish off the coast of Ireland. One day, he finds a young woman in his nets. He helps her, and when she regains consciousness, he is relieved to see that she seems unharmed. However, she behaves quite strangely and refuses to go to the hospital. She also can't remember her name, which Syracuse attributes to amnesia. He takes her to his late mother's house, offers her some sandwiches, and suggests she stay there for a while. He needs to go see his daughter. Annie lives with his ex-wife, Maura, and today he has to take the girl to dialysis. While the procedure is ongoing, he tells Annie a story about a fisherman who caught a woman from the sea. Annie explains that it was likely a selkie, a creature she learned about at school. Sometimes they come ashore until the sea calls them back. After the procedure, Syracuse takes Annie back to her mother, who is eager to show her the new electric wheelchair she received. Annie shows off the chair to her father, but her mother immediately criticizes him for not talking to the doctor about a new kidney for their daughter. The next morning, Syracuse finds a woman washing clothes in a stream, singing in an unknown language. She asks if she can come with him, and he lets her board his boat. On the way, she says her name is Ondine, which means from the water. Soon, Syracuse's boat stops for lobster fishing, but the baskets come up empty. Ondine begins to sing a song that Syracuse has never heard before, and suddenly every basket is filled with a catch. She helps him pull them out and is surprised when he throws the smaller ones and extras back into the sea. However, she flatly refuses to go with him to the market. He sells the lobsters to the astonished buyers and purchases a dress at a store. Then he heads to pick up Annie from school. On the way home, he continues the story about the fisherman and the woman from the sea. She sings to the fish and he catches them. Both are happy. Annie thinks it's a dream because everything seems like his dream coming true. Moreover, no one knows the language she sings in. After dropping his daughter off at home, Syracuse heads back, not noticing that the curious girl is following him. He gives Ondine some clothes and food when he reaches the house and finds her talking to his father, who asks how long she'll be staying in his house. Hearing that it's up to him, Syracuse decides she'll stay forever to live with him happily ever after, like in the fairy tale he's been making up with Annie. After seeing everything with her own eyes, Annie goes to the library and asks for books about selkies. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to church to confess, admitting he's an alcoholic, even though he hasn't drunk for over 2 years. Lately, he's been haunted by a dream where he attends the funeral of his ex-wife's new husband, Alex, after which he reunites with Maura, who still struggles with alcohol problems. The priest advises him to see a psychologist, but Syracuse reminds him of the secrecy of confession and tells him that he pulled a woman out of the water with his net. Now he's hiding her from everyone else. The priest asks him to come to Mass as there's no other way he can help him. Meanwhile, Annie is studying legends about selkies. Ondine cleans the cottage and then examines the new things Syracuse brought her. She's particularly intrigued by the fishnet stockings, which she stretches over one hand, making them look webbed. The next day, Annie goes to her grandmother's cottage and sees Ondine swimming. The girl boldly approaches the shore and declares that she knew all along. The story about the fisherman and the selkie isn't a fairy tale. Annie tells her about her illness and asks her to heal her, but Ondine doesn't know magic and says so. The girl asks a lot of questions, and Ondine likes the lively and straightforward child. Annie asks her to always tell the truth, because what's the point of friendship otherwise? She's very curious about what it's like underwater. Is it better or worse than here? Ondine says it varies, but singing is easier there. Annie shares everything she's learned about selkies from the books. They can stay on land for up to 7 years until they find happiness with a human. Then she abruptly shifts the conversation to her grandmother because her father still misses her very much. Remembering her mother, Annie prepares to go home, and Ondine asks her to come back again. Syracuse also goes to the library to borrow books about selkies, only to find out that Annie has already taken them. Meanwhile, Annie meets up with the neighborhood kids who show off their bikes, and she lets one of the girls play with her wheelchair before it runs out of power and rolls into the water. The kids abandon Annie, and she has to make her way home where she's met by Alex. He recharges her battery and tells her that selkies were invented in his homeland of Scotland, but the girl insists that Ondine speaks a different language. Meanwhile, Syracuse finds Ondine on a pontoon in the middle of the bay and offers to take her back to his boat. He asks her to hold the tiller, but when a patrol boat speeds by, Ondine hides and steers the boat with her foot. Syracuse teases her, noting that she manages just fine with her feet. She starts singing again as he pulls up his net and discovers it's filled with a bountiful catch of salmon, which his nets usually can't catch. Before he can fully enjoy his luck, Syracuse sees the patrol boat returning. The wildlife officers find the salmon and demand to see the nets he used to catch them. He shows them the usual nets for catching salmon, but they're completely dry, meaning he's telling the truth. However, the men notice Ondine hiding in the hold. She confirms that Syracuse caught the salmon in an ordinary net, and they leave the boat. Relieved that the officers believe their story and that nothing happened when Ondine was seen by people, they head to the harbor together to sell the catch. Syracuse offers to buy her a gift, and she asks for another dress, which she'll choose herself. On the way to the store, they run into Annie, who's thrilled that their story isn't just a fairy tale. The girl helps Ondine pick out an outfit while the townspeople gawk at the pretty stranger through the shop window. Later, Annie arrives at her grandmother's house, which looks festive and cozy thanks to Ondine's efforts. Ondine offers to teach the girl how to swim, and she agrees since she'll have someone from the sea by her side. They both play in the shallow water when Ondine suddenly sees something in the water and asks Annie to get on the raft. She pulls out a bundle, which Annie calls selkie clothing. According to legend, if she buries it in the ground, she'll be able to stay on land for 7 years, provided her sea husband doesn't come for her. After listening to Annie, Ondine buries the find in the greenhouse, and Annie counts the steps to remember the exact spot. Later, she tells her father about it and advises him to watch out for strangers. Meanwhile, they all head to the local festival by boat, and Ondine denies Annie's claim that she can grant wishes because she's not really a selkie. Upset, Annie pretends that her wheelchair brakes have failed and falls off the pier, hoping to test the truth of her words. Ondine jumps in to save her and pulls the girl to the surface. Syracuse carries Annie home and hands her over to Moore and Alex. Later, Ondine tells Syracuse that the wheelchair's brakes work just fine and that Annie was testing her ability to breathe underwater. He confesses that he used to drink heavily, but one day he returned from a trip to find Annie's mother sleeping next to their unconscious child. They saved the girl, and he decided that one of them had to stay sober at all times. Meanwhile, Moore tells Annie that a dark-haired stranger has been looking for the fisherman's girlfriend, which causes the girl to have a nightmare. Meanwhile, Syracuse and Ondine become intimate. Later, he goes to confession and admits to the priest that he sinned with Ondine the night before, and now he fears the luck she brings because he's long lost hope for the best. He knows that something wonderful or terrible will happen, and he's afraid of both. After the conversation, the fisherman steps outside and is approached by an unknown man who starts asking questions about Ondine. Syracuse ignores him and walks away. That day, he takes Annie to dialysis as usual, but when they return home, no one is there. Maura and Alex had been out drinking at the nearby pub. Syracuse takes the girl there. Finally reaching home, he finds the doors broken in and Ondine nowhere to be found. Syracuse searches the shore and eventually finds her hiding. She reminds him of the Selkie's husband and says he's here to take her away. Meanwhile, the intoxicated Maura is riding her daughter's wheelchair and, despite Alex's warnings, is determined to make it home on it. Syracuse hides Ondine in a secret cave behind the waterfall, offering to grant her a wish, but her only wish is for Annie to get well, so he wishes for her to be able to stay. Meanwhile, the man searching for Ondine is driving around town and gets into a car accident, colliding with a car driven by the intoxicated Maura. Alex is thrown through the windshield. Annie, however, manages to buckle up, but still sustains injuries. Syracuse and Ondine, driving by, recognize the car. Syracuse screams and rushes at the medics as they load Annie onto a stretcher to take her to the hospital. Later, they find the girl in the hospital and learn that she's undergoing an immediate kidney transplant from Alex, who, by a stroke of luck, was a compatible match. Meanwhile, the unknown man meets Ondine in the hallway. He wonders why she speaks their language because neither of them belongs here. The sea spat her out, but this is not their world. The woman asks him to return home without her. The next morning, Annie wakes up and immediately asks where Ondine is. Syracuse reassures her that they'll see her soon. Sometime later, a cremation ceremony for Alex takes place. Maura scatters his ashes over the sea, regretting that this time she can't blame her ex-husband for everything. She asks him to take Annie, but demands that he get rid of Ondine, and she forces her husband to drink to Alex's soul. In a drunken state, Syracuse goes to the boat where Ondine is hiding and, calling her a Selkie, takes her out to sea where he demands that she return to her husband and sing her songs to him. He takes her to the foot of the lighthouse and continues to insist that she needs to leave. He leaves her there and prepares to sail away, believing that life isn't a fairy tale. People and Selkies can't be together. Ondine asks for a chance to say goodbye to Annie, but he sails away. As dusk falls, the log she's sitting on gives her silhouette the appearance of a woman with a tail. Waiting for nightfall, she jumps into the sea. In the morning, the priest wakes up a depressed Syracuse, who realizes he's made a big mistake. He brings Annie from the hospital to his home. The girl comforts him, saying that Ondine will come back because she left something here. Later, Annie watches TV, where the Icelandic band Sigur Rós is performing, and suddenly Syracuse recognizes the words. He realizes that Ondine was an ordinary woman and rushes to the lighthouse. At first, he can't find her anywhere and runs along the shore, shouting, but soon he sees a fire where Ondine is warming herself. At first, she says she's a sea creature who found her magical clothes and buried them so she could stay forever with the family she loves. But Syracuse demands the truth, and then Ondine admits that she was a courier delivering illegal substances from Romania. She was in a boat with a backpack full of substances when the police closed in. Her guard threw her into the water because he couldn't swim. She swam until she couldn't anymore, and then she drowned. But she got caught in Syracuse's net. The girl tells him her real name, Ioana. The fisherman takes her home where criminals are already waiting, having taken Annie hostage. Syracuse tries to fight them off, but he can't handle two armed men. The girl told him the story about the Selkie's clothing buried in the greenhouse, and the men demand to be shown the spot. Everyone heads to the greenhouse to dig up the goods, but they find nothing because Annie has hidden the Selkie's clothing elsewhere. Undine promises to stay with Annie, and she admits that she hid the package in the lobster crate. Everyone heads to the boat, but when the criminals lift the basket, Annie reminds Undine that she's a Selkie, and they are not. Undine throws one of the villains overboard. He drowns while Syracuse throws the other Romanian into the water, disarming him. The arriving police arrest the criminal along with Undine, who faces deportation unless she gains citizenship, or she could get married. Later, Annie goes to confession and says that her father's getting married soon. Even though she wasn't a real Selkie, but you can't marry a seal, can you? In the final scenes, a girl in a white dress and a fisherman in a suit sail off on their boat for a honeymoon, bringing to life the fairy tale about the happiness of a human in a Selkie. That's where the movie ends. Evening supermarket. Near one of the shelves, a young man is talking on the phone with his wife. The woman is irritated, and the guy is trying to justify himself. He didn't intentionally almost buy the wrong product, and his purchase of a PlayStation has nothing to do with it, and they wouldn't have been able to relax in a Lupka even with that money. He went there for work. At the checkout, there are 3 people in line. The first is a man who looks a bit homeless. The cashier announces the total, and the man is short of 10 rubles. He tries to persuade the cashier, but she remains firm. So the man turns to those waiting in line. If they care about the fate of a person, they should lend him the missing amount. He asks them to think that they are all preparing for a terrible judgment. And what will they be able to tell when facing the Almighty? While the man delivers this speech, people react differently. One person leaves the line altogether. The man turns to a young guy. It seems like he's not destitute. So, what are 10 rubles to him? A woman standing behind him takes out a coin. The man thanks her and says that angels won't forget her, and perhaps this act will outweigh all her sins. Then he takes out 50 rubles from his pocket and gives it to the cashier. He returns the coin to woman, places a 10-ruble coin on the counter, and tells the young guy that he will need it. The man adds that he will have something to remember in hell. The homeless man leaves, and the young guy makes the payment. The cashier asks for change, 10 rubles, and he hands her the homeless man's coin. The young guy exits to an empty parking lot. He continues his phone conversation, again justifying himself for some business trip and a woman whom his wife is jealous of. He sees the man who was sitting on the curb earlier. He approaches and gives him the coin because he doesn't need someone else's. The homeless man asks, is he afraid of burning in the fiery Gehenna? Perhaps he believes in the Lord? The guy confesses that he's not very religious, to which the homeless man inquires, so, after death he plans to become worm food? Is that the pinnacle of his life? The guy says he's a mathematician and believes in the exact sciences. He asks if there's any evidence of God's existence. The homeless man claims there is an undeniable fact. The guy starts making fun of him and suggests taking a break from doing nothing on the way back. The homeless man starts crying. The guy is confused about what upset him so much. He reassures the homeless man, telling him he's young and he has everything ahead of him. It's the right time to think about the future because it all depends on him. By the way, he mentioned earlier that he can provide evidence of God's existence. And the homeless man calmly says that he saw Jesus himself because he is the eternal Jew, the one who didn't let the Lord rest at his house when he was carrying his cross. He told Jesus that he would rest on the way back. Jesus agreed, but he would have to wait for him. The guy asks again, and this happened 2,000 years ago. The homeless man understands that it does indeed sound strange. He was amazed at first too, but then he got used to it. So, for him, the existence of Jesus Christ is a fact. However, he can't prove it in any way. He didn't keep a piece of clothing that Jesus wore, and how could he prove that it wasn't a piece of his own underwear? He doesn't have the cup from which Christ drank or the stone from under his cross. The guy concedes that the Jew saw Jesus. What was he like? The homeless man says he was just like everyone else, only tormented. He also doesn't remember his face. The guy remembers all the faces he's seen in his life. The guy is puzzled and asks again to tell him what happened. The Jew says that Jesus was being led past his house under guard. He stopped to rest, and the Jew forbade him to lean on his house. After all, he called himself the Son of God. It was outrageous, so he told him that he would rest on the way back, and God ordered him to wait for him. He couldn't know who he really was, and no one could. The guy asks if the Jew is ashamed that he didn't let Jesus rest. The homeless man asks, maybe that was God's plan? The guy asks if he tried to make amends for it. Maybe become a clergyman, for example. The conversation partner admits that he tried that many times, but no one descended from the heavens, and no indulgence was granted. The guy asks, what else has he been throughout all these years? Maybe an immortal killer. An immortal killer, that would be cool. The Jew objects. Being immortal is cool in movies, but in real life, you need to find food, seek warmth, and wait, like waiting in line. He has already studied all the ads on the walls, all the holes in the couch, but people keep coming and going. It's no longer interesting to him who stood where in the hierarchy, whose place was more comfortable, who jumped the queue. The guy inquires, what is he waiting for? The second coming, or the end of the world? The homeless man nods, maybe both. No one knows when the end will come. The guy is puzzled again, but an ordinary person is afraid of death. So is the homeless man. He's eternal, but if you cut off one of his fingers, he won't keep living with 4 fingers. He's broken his bones many times. But what if a tank shoots him in the head? Will he be an undying headless man? The homeless man confidently says that won't happen. Hasn't he tried to end his life himself? The Jew nods. Of course, he even tried to hang himself in the very beginning. He hung from a tree for 2 weeks with excruciating pain in his throat until the branch broke. Later, in 1945, he was captured by the fascists and got scared. He tried to shoot himself. The gun jammed. It was exploded, shredding his whole arm with shrapnel. But everything healed. He came to Russia from Poland 40 years ago. The guy is curious again. Maybe he's just schizophrenic, and doesn't it bother him at all? How did he decide that all these events were real? The homeless man shows his arm. He made notches. 920, 1464, 1812. Decades pass. And he sits and thinks, maybe he scratched them yesterday, put the dates, as if 200 years had passed. And he asks for help to figure it out, like stabbing him with a knife, for example. But the guy refuses. He doesn't want to explain to the police that he saw Jesus and shouldn't have died. The homeless man shrugs, saying, that's how it works. They walk across the parking lot. The guy asks him to tell something from history. For instance, what was happening in the 1st century? The homeless man responds, well, in general, it was the same. Shepherds herded sheep and fishermen fished. The guy insists, but in the world, the significant appearance of Jesus, church reforms, any mysteries and intrigues? The homeless man, in puzzlement, asks, where does he know all this from? He also learned it from books. Now, the guy remembers where he was in August 2000. Throughout the ages, he just lived. He was in different countries. It's just that the body requires a warm place and a piece of bread. As for how neighbors reacted to him being eternally alive and forever young, they didn't pay much attention to him, and he didn't stay in one place for long. Does he know ancient languages? He does, but now they are considered dead, and who can verify them? The men touch upon the topic of space. The homeless man has seen many strange things, but he hasn't encountered extraterrestrials. The most pressing question, can it really be that in all this diversity of worlds, there are no other forms of life? The guy comments that it's all too profound for a homeless, possibly heavy-drinking man. The homeless man leaves, and the guy locks his car and follows him. He asks, why did Jesus punish him? Shouldn't he be all-forgiving? The Jew says that it wasn't Jesus who punished him at all. He cursed himself with his own words, and the Lord simply fulfilled his own wish. The biggest curse is not that he's been waiting for 1,000 years, but that he, like a dull shepherd, remained the same. A person who creates, lives a spiritually enriched life. The guy doesn't believe it. It just can't be. After all, he's been living for so long. He knows much more than others. Surely he met great people like Michelangelo or Nietzsche. To this, the homeless man retorts, how can you understand what they'll say about this specific person after death, that he was a genius? The guy asks how people lived, what they thought, and what they believed in 1,000 years ago. The homeless man responds, they believed the earth was flat, that God sat in the sky above the clouds and watched every step. But if he is simply looking through our own eyes, then he is just an observer, and he can't judge us for our actions, right? It means he is concerned about our actions only as much as they concern us. And if God is in everyone, then so is the devil. The guy teases him. Those are some profound words for a weird man. The homeless man smiles. In a certain sense, a person always has a choice. And fate exists. The fate of a person is determined by their choice. But at any moment they can stop choosing that fate and start choosing another. So why, even in the modern world, are people willing to kill those who don't share their faith? You just need to make an effort to keep your opinion about someone else's religion to yourself. A person finds something sacred for themselves, and it gives their life meaning, but then they start comparing their primary gender characteristics. They try to prove that their meaning is more significant and more important than another person's. Of course, it leads to conflict. His wife calls again. The guy apologizes and says he hasn't finished yet. He met an interesting person and got engrossed in conversation. She says she'll come over now. He goes back to the homeless man and sits down next to him. The guy asks, why is he homeless if he's so intelligent? And why doesn't he want to change anything? The homeless man says he's living like he's preparing for a big exam, postponing the transformation of his life for later. The conversation partner says he's living somewhat similarly, but he doesn't want to think about death. He's still very young after all. The Jew reassures him, you won't even notice how it passes. No matter what a person does, middle age arrives, and then old age. And deep down, every old man feels like a little boy. The guy says he doesn't want to think about old age and death. Probably that's why people invented religion, to make it seem like there's something after death. Then he smiles and says that he's been clearly fooled. His conversation partner hasn't lived for 2,000 years. He doesn't seem crazy, but maybe he has a special organism. Cells divide more frequently, the body constantly regenerates, unique genetics perhaps. Probably they can make medicine from his blood. It can't be that he hasn't done anything remarkable throughout his life. He was in Poland during World War II. Did he hide Jews? The Jew laughs. He is a Jew himself. It was a Polish family that hid him, and then they were discovered and taken as prisoners. That's when he tried to shoot himself. The guy laments, well, yes, times were tough. The homeless man disagrees. Times are always the same. The conversation partner is astonished, but how can that be? Everything has changed in the world. If you trace history from the Middle Ages to the present day, a lot has changed. The Jew says that everything changes if you pay attention to those changes every day, just like a river flows, rages, and is never the same. However, the way that river flowed 100 years ago is the same way it flows today, in the same channel. The guy becomes more animated and asks the homeless man what he thinks about the paradox of faith. Can God create a stone that he can't lift? The homeless man explains, it's a paradox of the mind. If he's a scientific atheist, he'd agree that all information about the surrounding world enters the mind through the senses. The idea of God is in his mind, so the problem is in his mind. God in your mind can't create a stone in your mind that he's about to lift in your own mind. The guy is puzzled, but if he can't lift it, then he's not all-powerful. The homeless man advises him not to overcomplicate things in his mind. The conversation partner sighs. He would like to get some answers. The homeless man says he would like to get some answers too. For example, he wants to know what our purpose is, or what happens after death, or what one needs to accomplish in life. Then he asks the guy what he personally would do if he lived for 1,000 years. Seeing the guy pondering, he concludes, he would simply live and nothing else. On the first day, he'd jump for joy. And then? The guy is puzzled. How can one realize oneself as an immortal person then? After all, if humans are God's creations, why did he create them? There must be some meaning to it, right? The homeless man agrees. There must be, but he doesn't know it. And he doesn't know a single person who has realized themselves. Even those who entered history feel like something is missing. Take Hitler, for example. Even if one imagines that he genuinely believed in the ideas he propagated and wanted to change the course of history, did he realize himself? No. He spent his entire life becoming and embodying the caricature of a villain with a mustache. Did he realize the spark inside him, the one that made people stand up and follow him? He doesn't know if one can realize themselves within the framework of our world. So how can a person get to heaven if there's a devil inside them? The homeless man says that all human emotions are manifestations of fear. The part of a person that lives in that fear experiences eternal torment in hell, but the other part of them is love. Even in the Bible, it's written that God is love. To get to heaven, one must choose God within themselves. The guy asks, "Are you God?" The homeless man laughs. He's unpredictable. Sometimes he calls him a homeless man, and sometimes God. He's a human being, but in him, just like in everyone else, there's a bit of God, a bit of love. But surely God must have had a purpose for him. He can't just have left him to live forever and await the end of the world for no reason. There must be meaning in all of this. And the Jew retells Plato's words. Horses are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a horse, which lives forever. Likewise, people are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a human, which lives forever. It will live until the end of humanity. Their meeting has no symbolism. He can consider that he just met the idea of a human, which he's always met, even in the mirror. All of them are embodiments of the idea of a human. Tall, short, sad, happy, lazy, successful, full, gloomy, and open. They all think they are unique, but new ones come to replace them. Year after year, century after century, they were children yesterday, and today they are already old. But even so, new ones come to take their place, running, jumping, munching, and leaving in just the same way. A phone notification rings. A woman walks around his car in the parking lot. The guy introduces the homeless man, saying he's the one who has seen Jesus himself. The woman thinks he's mocking her. She drove across the entire city, and he's here with a vagabond. The guy tries to explain. Then a man with the same face as the homeless man approaches and yells at him. He's been looking for him for over an hour. Bags won't carry themselves. The homeless man leaves with him. The guy is bewildered. They are identical. The woman says he's gone mad and gets into her car, driving away. The guy gets into his car and looks in the mirror. The eyes of Ahasuerus are looking at him.
Welcome to the show.
A man is running through a dark forest in Ireland. He seems frightened despite constantly encountering signs with the words "point of no return" and various numbers, indicating either directions or distances to something. However, he fails to escape. Darkness quickly envelops the surroundings, a flock of birds flies overhead, and he falls into a pit. In the next moment, an invisible force grabs him and drags him away. Elsewhere in the country lives an artist named Minna, who works in a pet store. One day, her boss asks her to deliver a rare parrot to a zoo in a neighboring city, and Minna agrees. She takes the bird home for the night. There, she tells the parrot that her mother died 15 years ago. Suddenly, the bird starts to respond. In the evening, Minna puts on a wig and goes to a bar where she introduces herself to a guy with a fictitious name, claiming to be a ballerina. In the morning, Minna apologizes to the parrot for her behavior, saying the real her would probably not be liked. Finally, the pair set off on their journey. On the way, her sister Lucy calls, reminding her that she has family and nieces who love and await her. Minna continues driving and eventually ends up on a road leading into an old dark forest. Unexpectedly, the car breaks down and stalls, and the connection also mysteriously cuts off. Taking the parrot's cage, Minna steps onto the road to seek help, but the forest is dark and empty. When she returns to where she left the car, the road is deserted. Minna continues to wander through the quickly darkening area, talking to the bird to keep herself cheerful and suggesting they name it Darwin. Suddenly, she notices a woman running past and decides to follow her. Minna catches up with her near a small forest cabin, and the woman, opening the door, orders her to come inside quickly if she wants to live. Naturally, Minna rushes into the cabin. The elderly woman is named Madeline. She has been living here for some time with two other young people, Ciara and Daniel. She immediately orders Minna to stand in front of a mirror because the watchers cannot enter inside but observe from outside, coming every night after sunset. Standing by the mirror, Minna suddenly hears sounds like applause. Madeline confirms her suspicions. The watchers are applauding the appearance of a new object. In the morning, Minna announces that she intends to leave. Although the others assure her it's impossible, she heads into the forest. Madeline catches up with her, explaining that the forest causes hallucinations. But it is possible to survive here. The signs scattered throughout the forest mark the boundary from which a person can reach the cabin before dark. But if you go beyond the boundary, there will be no way back. They were made by a man named the Professor. But where he is now, no one knows. That night, Daniel puts on a show for the watchers, presenting them with the newcomer, but they ask her to behave as usual. Meanwhile, Sierra turns on the music and dances, as she does every evening. Mina, on the other hand, finds discs with recordings of Love Search TV shows. In the morning, she and Sierra go to gather medicinal herbs because her missing husband asked the girl to take care of Daniel. Then the man went to search for a way out and disappeared. Sierra explains that recently they found strange burrows scattered throughout the forest. That's where the watchers go during daylight hours. She believes she has been in the cabin for almost 5 months. Later, Madeline announces the safety rules. Never leave at night, never open the doors for anyone, always try to stay in the light. Strange life begins with entirely identical days. Mina watches endless shows and often stands staring into the mirror. One day she knocks on it, and immediately there is a knock on the door. Madeline orders everyone to freeze and everything stops. The next day she and Daniel go hunting. The boy tells her that Madeline used to work at the university, so she considers herself a know-it-all. But she has been living here the longest. Daniel himself has been in the cabin for 8 months, but has never seen anyone. After listening to the boy, Mina convinces Daniel to help her explore a burrow. Using a rope, Mina descends, explores it, and finds old items, newspapers, toys, pieces of electronics, and an old bicycle, which she ties to the rope and sends up. But then strange sounds, similar to those heard at night outside the cabin walls, echo from the darkness. Mina screams and the rope falls at her feet. Climbing out into the light, Mina leaves the dangerous place, and they calmly examine the items. With the bicycle, it might be possible to escape from here, but Madeline has a rather strange reaction to this. Meanwhile, Daniel manages to assemble a surveillance system from the found pieces of electronics and installs a camera by the door. At night, everything goes as usual. Sierra dances when there is a knock on the door, and Daniel suggests that a person has come. Madeline forbids opening it, but they hear the voice of Sierra's husband. Sierra tries to prove that it is John by asking him what book she is reading, but he does not answer. Although they bought this book together on his advice, the man begs to be saved from death. Sierra asks to look into the camera, but when he leans towards it, something drags him into the forest. Immediately there is a knock on the mirror stronger than ever before. Madeline stands in front of the people, as if shielding them, and the knocking stops. In the morning, Madeline throws the bicycle into the burrow, demanding that they no longer break the rules. Later, Mina recalls her sister and mother, who invited the girls for a car ride. The weather was beautiful and Mina opened the window. Her mother asked her to close it because the wind was bothering her, but Mina didn't listen, mimicking her mother, who got distracted from the road, and the tragedy happened, for which Mina still feels guilty. Winter soon arrived. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and food became increasingly scarce. Quarrels began to flare up among the cabin's inhabitants. One day, Sierra left for the forest. Mina caught up with her, and she confessed that she felt John was real. She runs to the house from where Daniel's screams are heard, angry with Madeline and Mina, refusing to let them inside. The women hide under a tree and soon see lanky, spider-like monsters emerging from the forest, approaching the cabin window, and making terrible shrill noises. The watchers stare at Daniel and Sierra while Mina and Madeline wait for them to leave so they can return to the cabin. When they do, the women rush to the door and beg to be let in. Daniel refuses, and then Mina tells him about her guilt towards her mother. She asks him to understand that he will suffer all his life, realizing that he is responsible for the death of people. The doors open. The 4 of them immediately stand in front of the mirror, hoping to convince the watchers that they are in place. Madeline admits that she tried to protect them from certain things. She used to teach history and mythology, and unlike them, came here voluntarily. Only here did she realize how dangerous this place was. Once she hunted alone and saw herself at sunset. Not an exact copy, but very similar. The Watchers are an ancient species with many names: changelings, winged ones, fairies. They study people to impersonate them, and they will never let them leave. Knocks and the voices of the cabin's inhabitants are heard outside. Then Daniel finds a hatch in the floor, which they didn't even know existed. Descending, they discover a well-fortified and equipped living space filled with food and equipment. Mina turns on an old computer, and a video recording shows the face of the professor, whose real name was Rory Kilmartin. He was the first to study the Watchers and tried to learn about their origins. In 1979, the scientist found this place, which he called Wonderlamp. Every evening, the Watchers came to his window and studied him. For many years before this, the professor's colleagues laughed at him, not believing his tales. Then he built this bunker, using the labor of men from nearby remote villages. He chose the lonely or those with bad habits so that their disappearance would not attract much attention, as every evening he convinced them to have dinner outdoors. Hiding inside, he watched the Watchers deal with them. Thus this bunker was built on blood. One day, a Watcher appeared before him in the form of a girl with red hair. She was very different from the others, as if she were unique and looked curious and harmless. That's when he realized that if he unlocked the secrets of the fairies, he might even conquer death. He did the impossible, lured this girl into a cage and began experiments on communication, trying to befriend her. She changed form, sometimes turning into a frightening creature with long arms, but seemed to listen to him. Gradually, she became close and understandable to him, but now the professor realized he had achieved nothing significant and was ready to end his life. He hid a boat by the river, and this is the only way out. Just follow the birds. He asked the survivor to go to his university office and destroy all the documents found there, and now he will go to her and stay here forever. In the last recording, they see Kilmartin climbing up. Gunshots are heard, and then all is quiet. Realizing that this is their last night in the forest, Sierra turns on the music and invites Daniel to dance, but he seems upset about leaving. He says his family is dysfunctional and he has nowhere to return to. Then the girl offers to let him stay with her for a while until they find him a good occupation and place to live, as they have become good friends. In the morning, the group sets out to escape, guided by the signs and Mina's parrot, whom she asked to lead them. Soon they reach a massive stone disc in the ground, covering the entrance to a huge tunnel. Madeline explains that this is where the last representatives of the ancient fairy race were locked up, who were once very friendly with humans. After many centuries, they managed to surface, but now the friendship has turned into hatred. They stay here because they are held by magic, so they need to run far away. They walk all day. Dusk falls, but there is no river or boat in sight. It starts raining and they fall into despair when they see huge flocks of birds flying in one direction. They run after them and reach the river. The women rush to the boat when Daniel hears screams behind him and sees John. He returns for him, rejoicing that the man survived, but it turns out to be a changeling. The women scream, begging Daniel to run, but he doesn't hear and dies at the hands of the Watcher, who then takes on his form while Madeline, Mina, and Ciara sail down the river. The women wake up in the boat and see that they have returned to civilization. They stop a bus and ride to the city, listening to music and only now realizing that it's over. Later, Mina goes to the university where Kilmartin worked, posing as his niece to enter his office and fulfill his last request. There, she finds more documents, photos, and a recording in which he discusses the fairies and the fact that there are still half-blood children in the world. Mina finds a stack of photos and, looking at them, seems very surprised. In the evening, Mina goes to Ciara's house, showing a photo of Madeline from the professor's belongings, explaining that it is his wife who died several years ago. So the Madeline they lived with in the cabin was a special fairy capable of moving during the day. It was she whom Kilmartin caught. He couldn't kill her, and she took on Madeline's form to return to civilization. Then a car pulls up to the house, and the real Ciara gets out, while the one she's talking to is actually a fairy. Realizing she has been exposed, the fairy knocks Mina out and changes shape again, turning into Daniel. They just want to live like other species, but due to human hatred, they are forced to stay underground. The fairy turns into Kilmartin and goes to Mina. In the house, the fairy transforms into her and prepares to kill the girl. But Mina says that there are others like her somewhere because she is half human and acknowledges that it was unfair of humans to banish the fairies from their world. The fairy softens and spreads her wings, admitting that Mina might be right, and she flies away. Mina revives Ciara. Later, she reunites with her twin sister Lucy, finally forgiving herself for their mother's death. She tells her about her experience, admitting that she still sees Madeline appearing in the forms of other people. Her nieces arrive to show Mina a drawing of her and Darwin, whom she still keeps as a pet. Meanwhile, outside, a girl with red hair appears, looking at their apartment windows and taking on the form of a girl with a strange face. This is probably not a horror movie, but rather a scary bedtime story when a child doesn't want to sleep and asks for something frightening. Everything builds up slowly and tastefully, but the ending unfolds somewhat mundanely, although mysteriously. Many years ago, humanity did indeed colonize Mars, where cities and villages were built, and Nikolai established a whole farm where he operates with his family and helper robots. However, the grasping hands of the oligarchy reached even to the Red Planet. It In the year 2085, a young man named Konstantin is preoccupied with wealth and readily takes on any projects promising profit. His friend, Nikolai, bets on intelligence. Konstantin passionately invents a device that will help translocate consciousness, which he aptly names the translocator. Konstantin immediately comes up with a catchy slogan for selling the device, but Nikolai tempers his friend's enthusiasm, as it's not even clear if this translocator works. So, Konstantin promises to bring a rat for an experiment, but instead brings a man named Vitaly, who is willing to swap consciousness with a dog, as it could be a ticket back home. His wife loves dogs. Nikolai refuses to conduct experiments on a human, even though Konstantin has already paid the man with money borrowed from his mother. Now he desperately needs results. Therefore, Konstantin conducts the experiment himself. Nikolai arrives when the man is already convulsing inside the device's force field. He tries to turn off the device, but at that moment it shuts down on its own because the transference is complete. However, the test subject makes no sound, and the frightened men attempt to get confirmation of the experiment's success from the dog. But the dog remains silent, while Vitaly speaks up, signaling a failure. The two men react differently to the failure. Konstantin is ashamed that at the age of 25, he's still asking for money from his mother. Meanwhile, Nikolai suggests starting a company with the slogan, "A robot in every home," and producing affordable helpers for every citizen. And if that doesn't work out, he plans to buy land on Mars and establish a farm there. 15 years later, Nikolai enjoys family life on Mars and manages his robotic farm. He films reports about his farm, showcasing the dairy products he's obtained through hard work, and introduces his helpers, robots, Galasha, Stepan, and Valera. The sentient tractor, Mitya, gets upset with his forgetful owner, but Nikolai quickly rectifies the situation and waves at him. Nikolai also has a favorite hobby, breeding copters, which greatly annoys his wife Nadezhda, as he spends a lot of money on his pastime. After deflecting her complaints by claiming he's shooting a promotional video, Nikolai shows his subscribers a drink made from tea fungus and introduces his eldest daughter, Marina, who is not enthusiastic about farm life at all. And after that, Nikolai presents his younger daughter, Lyudmila, who is passionate about constructing cyber weather installations in the form of Russian birches. There are 4 such birches controlling the weather in the entire region, which the girl enthusiastically demonstrates to the audience. Afterwards, the guy settles into his cyber bread box and flies to the landfill, which is regularly replenished with waste from Earth. There, he accidentally finds a discarded but fully functional robot. His wife, Nadezhda, is angry with her husband for bringing all sorts of junk into the house. However, he plans to name the discovery Vova and integrate it into their household, to which accommodating Nadezhda reluctantly agrees, but she prefers to call the robot Vanya. In conclusion, Nikolai invites good people to come to Mars, build, develop, and enjoy life, a sentiment echoed by his entire family. However, while relaxing in the evening amidst the idyllic Russian natural landscape, Nadezhda has serious doubts that anyone will heed their call. Meanwhile, the CEO of a major corporation, Konstantin Baragozin, is indulging in some pool time while contemplating his portrait on the moon when he is informed about the arrival of shareholders. Irritated, he wonders why his assistant Pavel couldn't come up with some excuse. However, Pavel has already exhausted all the reasons Konstantin could use to decline the meeting. At that moment, a button pops off from the CEO's jacket, right in the hands of a robot, who is promptly discarded. Konstantin angrily insults the shareholders who have just entered his office, and they begin to ask uncomfortable questions. Failing to provide clear answers, he is threatened with a change in leadership. He reminds them that Izhevsk Dynamics is his brainchild, and it was he who came up with the slogan about robots in every home. To this, they respond that the controlling stake of shares is in their hands. Konstantin urgently needs to come up with something positive, which he passes on to his assistant. Unable to think of anything better, Pavel announces the construction of a new factory on Mars. The shareholders like the idea, and Konstantin is given 1 month to execute it. In turn, he delegates the task of starting construction to Pavel. However, it turns out that the eccentric person who built the farm in the right location refuses to sell it for any amount of money. Konstantin orders that this stubborn person be shown to him and is surprised to see his childhood friend, Nikolai. Meanwhile, on Mars, a new day begins. Lyudmila sifts through the old remnants of her father's inventions and finds the translocator, but Nikolai brushes off her questions because they have a more interesting task at hand: activating the new robot. When turned on, it starts searching for a rag to perform the task of floor cleaning. At that moment, spaceships land on the farm, and from the largest one emerges a delegation led by Konstantin, who rushes to embrace his old friend. However, Nikolai isn't particularly thrilled with the guests. Konstantin is amazed by the abundance of goats, which have long been extinct on Earth. But Nikolai doesn't want to talk about his achievements because he's deeply resentful of Konstantin's underhanded takeover of their joint company. Konstantin suggests putting the past behind them and offers a huge sum of money, enough for Nikolai to settle anywhere, even on Jupiter's moon, Europa. For this suggestion, he immediately receives a punch in the face. Enraged, the director signals his assistant to read out a decree declaring the corporation as the owner of Mars, and the demolition of the farm buildings begins immediately. This is when Nadezhda steps into the fray, but Konstantin's henchmen grab the family and lock them in a hangar. Suddenly, the man realizes that the robot Vanya is missing and sees that it is still carrying out its task. Nikolai outwits the guards and escapes from the hangar, while Konstantin's assistant tries to persuade his boss to be more lenient, since evicting people from their homes is illegal. For this, he promptly loses his job. Meanwhile, Konstantin finds a sink and starts washing up, taking off his expensive jacket, which the robot Vanya promptly mistakes for a rag and adapts it to clean the floor. An infuriated Konstantin runs after the robot, but at that moment, the workers dismantle the farm's generators, and Nikolai, who has rushed into the barn, shoves his former friend, causing him to land precisely in the translocator chair. The device activates. When it all ends, Nikolai tries to activate Vanya, but it suddenly starts speaking with Konstantin's intonation and threatens to destroy the entire farm. Seeing the man's body, the robot begins to scream, realizing that its consciousness has ended up in Vanya's body. Nikolai is pleased that the translocator works, and the robot becomes angry, demanding to be returned. Meanwhile, Konstantin's body begins to behave erratically, which his assistant notices. Pavel orders that the suffering CEO be taken away, pushing aside the annoying piece of machinery. Nikolai sees Konstantin being loaded onto a spaceship, where his family is, and rushes after them, but the spaceship takes off, leaving Nikolai and Vanya with the CEO's consciousness in an iron head. At night, Nikolai fixes his car, all while enduring Konstantin's reproaches, who demands that the man urgently take him back to Earth, for which they need to reach the train station. Nikolai scolds the inept CEO, who then sets off on foot but gets stuck in Martian sand. In the morning, Nikolai finds him, and upon hearing his promise not to interfere with the farm, digs out the robot and drives it to the train station, encountering a Martian sandstorm along the way. Meanwhile, Konstantin's assistant returns home, where he is greeted by his wife and children. He has to admit that he got fired. Galina reminds him that their family is drowning in subscriptions, for the apartment, for the car, for the new renovation. They'll have to give up Italian wallpaper and designer furniture. And tomorrow, their subscription for the refrigerator expires. Maybe they should ask Baragozin for leniency. After all, it's all for the family. Meanwhile on Mars, Nikolai frees himself from the sand-covered car and locates Vanya's head by his voice. Searching further, he finds Vanya's body, which he has to catch up to. After assembling the robot, he digs out the car, and Vanya confesses that the train they're rushing to is the last one, because nobody should know about the construction of the new factory. Finally, the couple manages to pull out the car, but it refuses to start, so Nikolai forces Vanya to apologize to the supposedly offended car, laughing at the absurdity. After that, the car starts and speeds towards the train station. At the same time, Pavel arrives at the office and sees damaged robots, scattered belongings, and an incoherent CEO who makes him eat soap. He calls a doctor who gives a startling diagnosis. Baragozin's memories and personality have been erased, and his level of development is that of a 1-year-old child. Meanwhile, Nikolai's car approaches the city of Marsyansk when an elderly woman flags them down, asking for a ride to the train station. The old lady takes a liking to Vanya, reminiscing about her own robot, Grishka. She had sold her land to Baragozin's company, received a gift, and got a train ticket. Nikolai asks the old lady to share her thoughts about the oligarch, because he can convey people's opinions to him. The elderly lady begins to express her desires, which Vanya has to confirm. Finally, the group arrives at the train station. Nikolai says goodbye to the car and sends it home. The people and the robot then board an interorbital elevator and ascend to the platforms. However, there are no tickets left for the train to Earth. Nikolai tries to negotiate with the conductor when Vanya notices a ticket with the elderly fellow passenger. Meanwhile, On Earth, Galina seeks details about the incident from her husband. It turns out that Baragozin won't start speaking and thinking somewhat normally for at least a year or two. She advises her husband not to tell anyone anything and to become the leader of the corporation and to raise a good person out of the former CEO. Pavel disagrees and the woman speaks and he pauses her. He works to fulfill all her wishes, but she's putting pressure on him. However, in reality, she's just a hologram, just like the children she made him subscribe to, even though they don't even resemble him. After expressing all his grievances, the man unpauses Galina, who, upon realizing that he had paused her, becomes furious with accusations, as he doesn't even understand what it's like. She's not doing it for herself but wants to make him successful and wealthy. He deserves it, after all. Pavel asks her to reduce the vanilla quotes option, and the hologram complies with his wishes but continues to pressure her husband. Meanwhile, Vanya brings a ticket to Nikolai, and the couple boards the train. But then, the man sees the elderly lady from earlier outside the window who can't find her ticket, and realizes where the robot got it. Vanya, pretending to be Konstantin, promises to send a shuttle for the old lady when they reach Earth, but Nikolai knows the true value of his promises. He demands that the robot apologize, return the ticket, and put the grandmother on the train. Vanya literally tosses the old lady into a moving car when the grandmother standing on the platform addresses them. It turns out that Vanya put a completely different grandmother in the car. Nikolai sends Vanya to catch up with the train and remove the wrong grandmother, while he helps the actual traveler catch up with the car. But the grandmother activates the rocket engine on her suitcase trolley and catches up with the train herself. The train departs. Vanya expresses everything he thinks about Nikolai's softness, which caused their separation in the first place. Then Nikolai switches Vanya to vacuum cleaner mode, and it starts cleaning the platform, threatening Nikolai with dire consequences when it returns to its body. Vanya finds a space mail ticket. Nikolai has an epiphany. The couple heads to the post office. At the same time, Pavel is getting ready to sleep in Baragozin's residence when Galina reminds him of certain options that were not available to them. Nikolai and Vanya set out on their journey to Earth in a postal box, but there's a mix-up at the sorting, and the package veers off course to Pluto. Meanwhile, Nikolai's family returns to Mars in a hacked rescue capsule, landing in the desert. They immediately spot their car passing by. That's where the second episode ends. Folks, if you're interested in finding out what happens next, please write about it in the comments, and we'll shoot the continuation. In a small provincial town in Pennsylvania, life flows peacefully and calmly. Milton Robinson, a 79-year-old widower and one of its citizens, leads the life of a simple retiree. He regularly attends town council meetings where he always raises the same issues about changing the town's slogan and installing an additional pedestrian crosswalk near his home. One summer morning after presenting his proposals, as usual, Milton heads home. He spends his day with his daily chores, has dinner, and goes to bed. In the morning, he waters his azaleas and feeds the birds. Later, his adult daughter Denise comes to help him with his monthly bills. There's no news from his elder son Tim, as he lives far away and rarely calls. After finishing their business, Denise goes to the restroom and finds a jar of peas there. She's concerned about her father's well-being, and even though Milton assures her he's fine, she suggests he see a neurologist for a checkup. After all, the man is quite old, and forgetfulness could be a sign of approaching dementia. However, Milton vehemently opposes seeing any doctors. Denise goes to work, leaving the old man alone with his beloved detective shows and a solitary dinner. One night he suddenly hears a commotion in his backyard, and going outside, he sees a flying saucer that has landed awkwardly. Milton calls the rescue service, but they remind him that joking with such a serious organization is a matter for the authorities. They no longer answer his calls, so he dials Denise's number, but she is unavailable. After a restless night, he heads to the town council meeting, where as always he talks about the slogan and the crosswalk. At night, the old man hears strange sounds from the backyard, goes out to see what else has happened, and finds an injured extraterrestrial being in his patio. Once again, he tries to reach his daughter, but Denise, as always, is unreachable. He leaves a voicemail and waits for a call, but it's all in vain. The next morning, as usual, he attends the meeting. His friend Sandy this time proposes a new project for interacting with the youth. She has put up posters around the town and would be delighted if someone came to listen to her stories and advice. She is eager to be part of the lives of lonely young people who need friends. When it's Milton's turn, he starts with the town's motto and the crosswalk as usual, but after that he talks about the UFO that ruined his flowers and broke the bird feeder. However, nobody believes him, considering it the ramblings of an elderly man. Two active retirees, Sandy and Joyce, advise Milton not to bring up this topic at the meeting anymore, or else no one will take the suggestions of the elderly townspeople seriously. Sandy suggests giving the old man a ride home and reminds him that she is always nearby and he can count on her help. Milton becomes angry, realizing that he is being taken for a lunatic. That evening, Milton checks his backyard again to see the extraterrestrial being whom he had thought was dead, but the creature suddenly raises its head and looks at him plaintively. Milton wraps the unconscious extraterrestrial in a blanket again and leaves a glass of water for it. In the morning, he finds the extraterrestrial wrapped in a blanket and seemingly shivering at his back door. Milton invites it inside since it's warmer in the house. He doesn't know what to do because he has never experienced anything like this before. The old man notices that the visitor has drunk all the water, so he brings another glass. Then he prepares a tray with various foods he finds in his house, but the extraterrestrial chooses only an apple. So, Milton goes to the store to buy apples, explaining to the cashier that it's for an extraterrestrial. The cashier treats him like a crazy person with delusions. Upon returning home, Milton sits on the couch in the living room and hears news about the search for a crashed weather satellite, but doesn't pay it much attention because he is startled by the sudden appearance of the extraterrestrial. Seeing that it's feeling much better and can even walk, the old man shows the extraterrestrial all the amenities and settles it in his home, providing a guest room and introducing it to television. Personally, he prefers detective shows because you never know how they will end. Milton shows photos of his family to the silent but attentive extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, his wife is no longer with them. His son has moved to California and his daughter visits him occasionally. Then the old man remembers the dance show and sits in front of the TV, inviting the extraterrestrial to join. On that day, the store clerk tells Denise about her father's strange statements about the extraterrestrial, and she goes to visit him during her lunch break. Milton meets her at the door, and as always, she insists on him seeing a doctor because she is very concerned about his mental health. Milton reluctantly agrees. Denise rushes off, and as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. It's Sandy, urgently needing a printer, and Milton invites her to come over and print the necessary documents. The woman arrives, and upon entering, sees the extraterrestrial. Milton introduces them to each other and shows the crash site. The woman is shocked, but tells Milton that they must keep this a secret for his own safety. She mentions how she has seen on TV how authorities treat poor extraterrestrials, and he shouldn't let anyone into his home except her. Sandy leaves, but Joyce has already noticed her car outside Milton's house and becomes curious about what's happening. Meanwhile, on TV, calls continue for the population to search for the crashed satellite. Time passes, and the extraterrestrial continues to stay in Milton's house, watching his favorite shows together. One morning, it brings Milton a piece of paper with a drawing of a cat on it. This touches Milton's heart, as the little one has drawn him a picture. He finds the extraterrestrial working on repairing its spaceship, apparently having fully recovered and getting ready to go back home. Soon, Milton visits a neurologist and undergoes tests, making some frustrating mistakes in some of them. During this time, Sandy stays with the extraterrestrial and complains to it about her daughter, who moved to the West Coast and lives with her friend. She is very upset that her daughter doesn't visit and doesn't bring her only grandchild. Meanwhile, the doctor, upon learning about Milton's forgetfulness and his stories about extraterrestrials, concludes that his abilities are deteriorating rapidly and suggests considering outside assistance for him. This greatly upsets Milton, and he angrily leaves after shouting at his daughter. Sandy, setting aside the children's book she was reading to the extraterrestrial, tries to ask questions, but the old man goes to his room. Later, he finds the extraterrestrial by its spaceship and complains about his daughter, who wants to put him in a nursing home. He hasn't been in touch with his son, and it seems he was a bad father. The extraterrestrial listens very attentively to the old man, putting down its tools. After this, Milton leaves a voicemail for his son, telling him about his life and Denise's affairs, hoping that he will find it interesting. The next day, Sandy brings a t-shirt for the extraterrestrial as she thinks it's uncomfortable for it to be naked. She also suggests giving it a name, Jules. Milton gets irritated by what he considers silly suggestions but eventually agrees with his friend. Meanwhile, Joyce, upon hearing about the government's offer of a reward for information about the crashed satellite, goes to Milton's house and looking through the window, sees the extraterrestrial. Now she is also in on Milton's secret and suggests naming the extraterrestrial Harry. Sandy suggests to Milton that he should acknowledge the fact that Joyce is joining their group, even though he's ready to kill the overly curious lady. Then she shows pictures of cats that Jules has drawn for him. Joyce speculates that Jules is trying to communicate something to the old man since all the drawings are of cats. However, Milton refuses to believe it. Meanwhile, the government receives numerous calls about various anomalies. One day, a woman complains about a man who spends hours staring at his rocket in the yard. FBI agents go to the given address but find a homemade rocket and a happy man next to it. At the same time, Joyce visits Milton to spend time with the extraterrestrial. She also gives it a t-shirt and offers it apples. During this time, Sandy receives a call from a young man who was interested in her posters. He comes to her house and the joyful woman invites him for tea. While Joyce talks to the extraterrestrial about her life in the big city, where she even performed in concerts because she sang well, Sandy engages in conversation with the guest and Joyce suggests singing for the extraterrestrial. While she does that, the young man asks for permission to use Sandy's restroom, but when she follows him upstairs, she sees him stealing her jewelry. After she threatens to call the police, the man attacks her and tries to strangle her. However, the extraterrestrial has a vision of the events and telepathically makes the man's head explode. This raises suspicions at the FBI, who are conducting the search for the crashed spaceship. Responding to police questions, Sandy suddenly realizes who saved her from certain death and rushes to Milton's house. She hugs Jules and tearfully thanks him for saving her life. The retirees discuss the potential danger of the extraterrestrial, but conclude that it's only dangerous to bad people. Meanwhile, the FBI agents can't understand how and from what the head of the criminal could have burst, so they decide to keep an eye on Sandy. On this day, Denise meets the elderly folks at the store and again brings up the topic of the apples Milton bought. However, Milton avoids the conversation. Later, the group has lunch at Milton's house when Sandy notices a strange smell. When they go outside, they discover a dead cat that Jules apparently brought there. Connecting all the facts, the retirees realize that the extraterrestrial needs cats for some reason, and now there are not 7, as in the picture, but 6. Milton calls Denise, hoping to find out where she disposes of the deceased cats in her clinic, which frightens her completely. Not receiving a clear answer, Milton and Sandy decide to drive around the streets of the town, since cats often meet their fate under car wheels. On the road, Milton inquires about Sandy's husband's illness, which eventually led to his passing, and she talks about being left alone. She starts asking questions, reassuring that life must go on. However, at this point, Milton asks her to stop the car, and the FBI agents become witnesses as the elderly couple loads a deceased cat into the trunk. That day, they find 2 more cats, and Joyce promises to find the rest. Meanwhile, FBI agents eavesdrop on the private conversations of Milton's close ones and hear Denise telling her brother about her father's eccentricities. At this moment, Joyce brings 3 more cats she found in different parts of the town. Only one is missing. Just then, agents knock on the door, but the elderly folks hide and don't open it. The men eventually leave, and the people realize they need to act quickly. And then, Milton remembers Joyce's deaf, blind, and non-mobile cat. Offended, she leaves, but Sandy catches up with her and apologizes for Milton's bluntness. Joyce admits that he's right. It's long past time to end the suffering of the cat. She brings the animal, and the extraterrestrial puts it to eternal sleep. Then it covers the remains with some material, and they start to merge into a single object. In the end, a glowing object appears in front of the group, which serves as fuel for Jules's spaceship. The saucer lifts off into the air and moves to the center of the yard, which is instantly detected by the FBI's instruments. The retirees understand that the time for farewell has come. Joyce gives Jules a souvenir globe with a view of the city inside. Sandy gives him a sweater she knitted, and Milton gives him his driver's license with a photo. But the extraterrestrial suddenly makes an inviting gesture, clearly offering them to join, and Milton suddenly decides to accept the invitation. But then the phone rings in the house, and picking up the receiver he hears Denise's voice. She suggests meeting on Saturday. They'll have lunch and then she'll give him a haircut because they've been arguing, and that's not right. At that moment, agents knock on the door. Milton rushes into the yard, and they only manage to see the departing saucer, where 3 Earthlings joined in the last moment. The ship lands not far from the town to safely disembark the elderly and bid them a peaceful farewell. Milton hugs the extraterrestrial and thanks it for the invitation to travel together, but he can't leave his home and loved ones behind. Jules enters the spaceship and flies away while the elderly folks wave goodbye to him. Time passes. Milton continues to live in his home, visited by Sandy and Joyce. The elderly often reminisce about Jules' Harry and hope that he hasn't forgotten them either. And one night, Milton's yard is illuminated by a bright light, and the old man realizes that he has guests. A light, heartwarming, and slightly melancholic film about the fading of human life. It's good that amid the plethora of recently produced nonsense, there are still such heartfelt and warm movies in which an extraterrestrial is not a villain who came to Earth to conquer it, but rather a cute and understanding silent being with expressive eyes.
You, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman.
One beautiful day, an ordinary family is celebrating a child's birthday. Dad is grilling barbecue, Mom is chatting with friends, while the kids are amazed by a cowboy's lasso throwing skills. Later, the children go to eat cake, and Cooper's daughter suddenly freezes, staring at the horizon. The man turns around and sees a huge nuclear mushroom cloud rising over the city. The next minute, the blast wave reaches their home. The owner hides his family in a shelter, while Cooper and his daughter jump on a horse and ride away as nuclear mushrooms rise behind him. 219 years have passed. Lucy is a young woman who possesses many skills and lives in shelter number 33 with her father and brother Norman. Unfortunately, it's impossible to find a man who wouldn't be related to her. Therefore, the council decides to allow her to take a husband from another colony. The happy girl puts on the communal wedding dress, while her neighbors, led by her father, the shelter's warden, prepare tables for the wedding, displayed in a field surrounded by a 3D image of distant mountains. The father is happy for his daughter, regretting that her mother didn't live to see her wedding. Then comes the moment when people head to the portal, guarded by the gatekeeper Chad, Lucy's cousin. He has long loved the girl but must admit the fairness of genetic ethics. The young man presses a button. The portal opens, letting in a delegation from a neighboring colony. Their leader reminds that for fresh blood, they must receive seeds and spare parts for machinery, and a young man is brought to Lucy. Their marriage is registered, and everyone sits at the tables. The shelter's residents notice that the guests are rather uncouth but decide not to focus on this. Lucy's father delivers a speech, hoping that the next generation might finally live on the surface. People dance and enjoy themselves, much to Norman's displeasure. The groom asks the girl to show him the bedroom, and she leads him to the room. The young couple begins to perform their duties while Norman patrols the colony and suddenly finds the body of one of the colonists. And Lucy unexpectedly hears a distant scream. She puts on a universal bracelet, which instantly shows that her young husband is infected with radiation, indicating he came from the surface. Realizing he's been found out, he lunges at her and throws her against the wall. Dazed, the girl watches as the guy takes a knife and prepares to kill her. Lucy remembers her skills and tries to take the knife, but the man stabs her in the side. At that moment, an alarm sounds. The man gets distracted, and Lucy knocks him out with a vase hit to the head, then administers first aid to herself and rushes to the armory, where she finds a pistol and hurries to the room where her fellow tribesmen remained. She kills an alien she encounters, but upon leaving the room, she witnesses a real battle. Lucy manages to save Norman when her unmade husband appears, but her father drowns the son-in-law in a barrel of water and rushes to a signal about a breach in the doors. Lucy runs after him and freezes in front of a team of aliens who have taken the shelter's residents hostage. The attacker's leader offers the man a choice: his fellow tribesman or Lucy. As the girl tries to understand what this means, her father locks her in a compartment, after which his captors take him with them from the surface when an explosion destroys the gates. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Earth, in the Brotherhood of Steel barracks, young men are beating one of them, Paladin Maximus. His friend helps the guy recover and leads him to classes where they are taught useful wasteland skills, as soon they will serve as knights. They are seekers and guardians and must be able to distinguish ancient artifacts. At this time, to the Paladin's great admiration, Steel Knights arrive at the base. Later, the friend leads Maximus to a hangar where their armor is stored to look at them. Later, Maximus hears cries of jubilation and finds out that some of them were promoted. Among them is his friend, who will become the assistant to Knight Titus. But in the morning, the barracks are awakened by a wild scream. It turns out that someone put a blade in the future assistant's boot, and the girl severely injured her foot. Maximus is arrested and led to the Brotherhood's leader. In the shelter, order is being restored. Lucy is stitching up her stomach wound, and people gather for a council meeting. She requests that a squad be assembled and sent to the surface to search for her father. However, the council refuses to do this. Lucy then gathers the necessary items and heads to the gates, accompanied by her brother. Chad rushes to go with her, but she sedates him and says goodbye to Norman. The gates open and the girl steps onto the surface. She surveys the world of sand, where traces of the past tragedy still linger, and walks towards the sea. Maximus is accused of maiming a comrade out of envy, but he denies it. The leader realizes the boy is not guilty and appoints him as an assistant to the Steel Knight. The next day, the leader assigns the knights and their assistants the task of finding an escaped scientist who has stolen a very important object. Knight Titus and Maximus load up on a helicopter and fly to their designated sector. At the same time, a band of bounty hunters lures a wild ghoul from the grave to find this scientist heading to the witch Moldover, with whom the ghoul has old ties. Unexpectedly, the ghoul shoots the hunters and sets off on his own accord. Lucy travels across the surface and one day stops to camp near an abandoned house. She makes a fire and falls asleep by it. She awakens to strange sounds and sees a dog devouring a huge insect. A man sitting by her fire explains that the cockroaches not only survived the nuclear blasts, they mutated and are now very dangerous. He advises the girl to return to the shelter as she does not know the rules of the outer world, but Lucy is obliged to find her father. The man leaves. Meanwhile, the Steel Knight and Maximus land in the right sector. Near their landing spot, the fugitive scientist and his dog hide in a cave. Sometime later, the knight and his assistant arrive there. Maximus immediately finds the sought-after scientist's tracks, and the knight heads into the cave. Maximus is also forced to go with him, though he has no armor. Inside, a giant mutant cave bear attacks them. The knight engages in combat, but the beast overpowers him, and Titus suddenly starts to run. Maximus barely manages to kill the huge beast. The knight turns out to be a weak man who blames and insults the boy. Then Maximus refuses to revive the wounded knight and lets him die, deciding to find the fugitive himself. He dons the armor himself and learns to use it. The boy is amazed at how his strength has increased and the boundless opportunities that have opened up before him. Incidentally, he saves a weakling, although it turns out that the person was not very good. He realizes that he needs to figure out who is worthy of protection first. Lucy reaches a town where she was advised to look for traces of her father's kidnappers. She enters one of the shops, where an elderly saleswoman, recognizing her as a shelter resident, advises the girl to leave this place. Shelters are underground havens where the rich hid while the world perished, so no one here will help her. The girl goes outside where the scientist with the dog approaches her again, surprised that she is still here. But then the saleswoman, who turns out to be waiting for him, calls out to him, and suddenly the ghoul appears, who has also come for the scientist. He intends to take him when the saleswoman promises money to anyone who helps protect the scientist. Then the ghoul shoots the scientist in the leg to prevent him from escaping and engages in battle with those who want the reward. The ghoul shoots everyone while Lucy sneaks into the shop, finds the order book, and learns the address of Moldover. She wants to leave, but sees how the ghoul injures the scientist's dog and hears his plea for help. She stands up for him and shoots the ghoul with a capsule, which only makes him laugh. Then a knight lands in front of the ghoul. Maximus asks the girl to look after the scientist while he fights the ghoul. She and the saleswoman take the injured scientist into the shop, where the woman attaches an iron leg to him and offers to accompany him to Moldover, giving her the coordinates. The pair leave while the ghoul fights the knight and quickly finds his weak spot. Maximus has not yet mastered all the advantages of the suit, which costs him losing his navigation ability. The Iron Knight is thrown far from the shop, and at that moment, the ghoul realizes that his target has escaped. Meanwhile, Lucy and the scientist stop to rest, and the girl watches in horror at the scientist's bloodied leg. She realizes they won't make it, and the man confirms this. He confesses that he will soon die, but she must definitely deliver his head to Moldover. He pulls out a saw and dies. Sometime later, the ghoul finds the headless body of the scientist amidst the sandy wasteland and follows the tracks of Lucy, who is carrying the head to Moldover. Soon the girl stops to rest and, after snacking, examines the head, wondering what is so special about it. Just in case, she inserts a tracking device into its nostril. Maximus examines the armor and finds a malfunction. Suddenly, he is called from the base, which surprises him. He reports the death of his assistant and is promised a replacement, though he vehemently opposes this. The boy heads to the nearest town, where he finds a workshop and, paying all the money he has, repairs the broken module. But when he returns to the suit, he discovers a gang of local marauders trying to dismantle the armor for scrap metal. He engages in a fight, but is hit hard in the face. The boy regains consciousness to see that the armor has been breached. He grabs a piece of metal lying nearby and uses it to destroy the attackers. Then he sees a helicopter arriving, dropping off a new assistant. The assistant turns out to be one of his tormentors from the training camp. Maximus manages to close the helmet, and the new assistant does not notice the substitution. Lucy reaches the place where Hollywood once stood. She stops by a pond when an unknown monster attacks her, snatching the backpack with the scientist's head and disappearing into the water. Lucy tries to track the thief but is caught in the ghoul's sights, to whom she explains what happened with the head. At this time, the Shelter Council conducts an investigation into Lucy's escape, after which Norman realizes that no one intends to search for either his father or sister. In the desert, Maximus torments the assistant with various misdeeds, avenging past humiliations, but the latter continues to serve the Steel Knight willingly. They find the ghoul's tracks with a special device, follow them, and find the headless body of the scientist. Meanwhile, the ghoul sets up a hunt for the underwater monster, using the girl as bait. Soon, the beast emerges onto the shore. It grabs Lucy, but the ghoul manages to pull her out. The girl barely manages to fend off the attack, but the underwater monster escapes, taking her boot. The enraged ghoul drags Lucy along. At this time, the Steel Knight's assistant fills the armor with water, talking about his life. Suddenly, Maximus asks him to talk about himself. The boy confesses that in fact he was a decent guy, and they beat him as part of the tradition like any other newbie. Now he regrets that Maximus didn't live to be called up for service. They move on and soon reach the pond. The pair enters the water and immediately sees the monster. Maximus demands the assistant to go ashore and takes on the fight himself, but the boy shoots at the creature and it chases after him. Maximus manages to pull the boy from the monster's jaws, and it dies, spitting out the scientist's head and Lucy's boot in its last act. Then a dog runs up to them, which continues on with them. The ghoul leads Lucy through the wasteland, denying her water, and soon they arrive at the place where a movie studio once stood, where actor Cooper and his wife worked. Soon they reach an abandoned clinic from which male screams can be heard. Entering, they find an old acquaintance of the ghoul, undergoing mutation and suffering because of it. The condition could be alleviated with special medication, but the ghoul doesn't have any, so the ghoul relieves the poor soul from his misery. The girl doesn't understand why he did it, but he explains they need something to eat. The girl mentions that they also had it tough, but never ate their own kind. Then the ghoul forces Lucy to cut up the body to take this meat with them. They continue on, although it becomes increasingly difficult for the girl without water. Soon the ghoul stops in front of a structure where radioactive water has accumulated. Lucy can't resist and starts drinking it, earning her companion's approval. She is finally beginning to understand the life of the wasteland. He is her future, and it won't be long now. Then he coughs, and Lucy tries to use this moment to escape, but stops in front of a huge crater, where she gets caught in his lasso. She tries to break free and accidentally bites off the ghoul's finger, for which he cuts off one of her fingers. Soon they reach an old supermarket, where the ghoul offers the woman in exchange for the items he needs. Stunned, Lucy enters the building, not noticing that the ghoul falls into unconsciousness. Inside, she is greeted by a robot. It invites Lucy to follow and implants a new finger for her. Then it pities her and confesses it will just take her organs, and immediately sedates her. Later in the shelter, Norman is delivering food to the aliens captured during an attack, and one of them confesses that the inhabitants of shelter number 32, which they captured before this, were planning something very bad. Norman tries to access the network to find information about shelter number 32, but the data are classified. Together with Chad, they clear the debris and penetrate shelter number 32, where they find a devastated field in the desiccated corpses of the inhabitants. But if they were dead when the aliens arrived, it turns out they killed each other. Lucy wakes up and sees many women locked in glass cabinets, ready to be dissected for organs. The robot prepares to open her chest cavity, but cuts her bonds instead, and she wriggles out from under its saw and disables the robot. Then she fills syringes with drain cleaner, reprograms the robot, and in its company, goes to the owners of the dreadful place. She forces them to release the prisoners, and people flee. But not all. Lucy forces the opening of the last cages. The owners comply, and out come zombies, who immediately tear apart two organ traders. Lucy surveys the battlefield in horror as the last zombie prepares to attack her, but she finds a pistol in her hand. Norman and Chad continue their inspection of the neighboring shelter and learn that its door was open from the outside with a key bearing the name of Norman and Lucy's mother. And Lucy finds medicine to sustain the ghoul's life, and despite the torture she endured, she hands the medication to the ghoul. Maybe she will look like him on the outside, but inside, she will never be like him. The girl leaves, and the ghoul goes into the shattered store and takes the necessary meds to bring himself to a relative semblance of order. Then he stuffs his hat with medicines. But then he notices a video recorder, puts in an old tape where Cooper plays a cowboy, and sits down in front of the television. Maximus and his assistant settle down to rest. Thaddeus cannot contain his delight at being rescued, as knights rarely treat their assistants kindly. He asks to be branded. Maximus obliges and lifts his helmet. However, upon recognizing him, the assistant attacks, resulting in Maximus breaking his leg. But Thaddeus manages to extract a nuclear core from the armor, immobilizing the exoskeleton, and leaves, taking the scientist's head with him. Giant cockroaches immediately attack the immobilized suit. Maximus, terrified, awaits his death when the insects scatter from gunfire, and Lucy approaches the knight. She explains why she needs the scientist's head and helps the man out of the suit, and he gives her medication for radiation sickness. When Lucy recovers, she suggests they go after the head together, since she has a tracker. They will hand it over to the Brotherhood, in return for which the Knights will help her find her father. Maximus agrees. At the same time, in Shelter 33, instead of her father, Betty is elected as the warden. Norman dislikes this and studies the history of the shelter. Suddenly, he realizes that all caretakers were selected from the residents of Shelter 31. Lucy and Maximus reach a bridge where they are stopped by a pair of vagrants. They pretend to be scared and ask for permission to pass. The couple, raising their hands, tries to walk away. However, the suspicious Maximus manages to shoot first, saving their lives, though he injures his hand, and Lucy realizes how naive the shelter's residents are. Soon they reach a billboard of the New Californian Republic. The girl is upset because they live with the belief that they are meant to revive America, but it turns out everything has already happened on the surface. Maximus reassures her, as there is no republic anyway. Soon they arrive at a huge crater in the middle of the city. The boy confesses that he survived this hell by hiding in a refrigerator, but then Lucy realizes that Maximus's wound is much more serious and leads him to a building with a clinic sign. Maximus lags behind, and when he enters, the girl is nowhere to be found. He searches for her and enters a chamber between two doors. The space fills with gas, causing the boy to lose consciousness. Betty leads her people to Shelter 32 to announce a partial relocation, as these resources are too valuable. Chad and Norman are surprised to see that the bodies have been removed and all traces of the tragedy have disappeared. Norman inquires about the whereabouts of his mother's key after her death. Betty confesses that they buried the woman with it. Maximus and Lucy come to in the shelter on stretchers. Maximus receives medical care. The shelter leader asks the couple to stay, as the boy needs treatment. Moreover, the suppliers have found armor and will soon deliver it here. Lucy thanks them for the refuge, and the leader informs her that she was born on the surface like many of them. The couple spends several hours in quarantine. From the conversation, it turns out that Maximus never knew a woman's love. Lucy is ready to teach him this art, as it is considered natural in the shelter, but the boy is embarrassed. Moreover, it is not customary among knights. Later they go to lunch, where they suddenly notice that many of the surrounding people have various physical deformities. The caretaker turns out to be a cyclops. For Lucy, this is strange, but Maximus does not understand her concern. Later, the caretaker confesses to Lucy that they accept people from the surface, which surprises the girl since this was strictly forbidden in her shelter. But when she asks about the forbidden level they were advised not to visit, the caretaker immediately ends the conversation. Maximus finds a room where a nuclear block is installed, powering the entire underground. The leader hands him an electronic key to his personal compartment and suggests he rest a bit. The boy enters, and upon entering, he is amazed to see a basket filled with various delicacies and things he has never seen before. For the first time in his life, he takes a real shower, puts on a robe and slippers, and indulges in unknown products. Meanwhile, Lucy finds a room where the entire history of the Californian Republic is vividly described. It turns out that life here was revived in 2142 but was destroyed in 2277. Lucy is horrified, wondering who needed a new war and why. But then all the shelter inhabitants hear a sound signal and head to the designated place. Meanwhile, a ghoul is caught by the so-called new president of the territory, who owned a supermarket trading in organs, and the ghoul is blamed for its destruction. However, he calmly asks for a needle and thread to sew his finger back on and asks for directions to find Moldover. But the president orders the ghoul to be killed. The ghoul has to destroy the new law enforcers and search for the woman himself. Lucy comes with everyone to a room, in the center of which stands an altar with burning candles. People begin to sing something, moving their hands, and Lucy gradually falls into a trance, supporting the others. Unexpectedly, people start to undress, which shocks Lucy. A bowl goes around, from which everyone takes some powder and smears their faces, and suddenly Lucy realizes with horror that it is the ashes of the deceased. In another bowl there is blood. People call to the Mother of Flame, who must save them, and an image of Moldover unfolds above their heads. A frightened Lucy runs to Maximus and urges him to run away quickly, but the boy has just found himself in such paradisiacal conditions and does not want to leave. So Lucy heads to the forbidden level. She enters a laboratory where apparently some genetic experiments on people were conducted. The girl is horrified as she examines the gruesome exhibits and notices glass cryocapsules containing human bodies. But then the lights turn on and a man in a white coat enters. Lucy hides, but he hears a noise, follows it, and finds the girl. Lucy fights, but the men who arrive seize her and drag her to the upper level. Meanwhile, the ghoul arrives at the digger's house, whose eldest son knows the location of Moldover. The frightened man orders the boy to tell everything he knows, and he admits that the woman can be found at the observatory. But when the ghoul is about to leave, the boy tries to kill him and pays with his life for it. At the same time, the shelter leaders shame Lucy as they had given her refuge, fed her, and healed her friend, but the girl is furious because she has seen what they do to people. Then they show her the complete recording of the attack on the laboratory of the very monster that almost devoured her too. It was the first inhabitants of the shelter who experimented on people, turning them into monsters. They are only trying to alleviate the pain of those who survived. The fact is that each shelter specializes in some experiment, and Lucy just doesn't know this. Nevertheless, she must be punished for her disobedience. The girl is led away, which Maximus sees. Thaddeus makes a stop to rest and realizes that his leg is in very bad condition. A dog bothers him, and he locks it in a metal box, then sets off to find a radio tower to contact the Brotherhood. At this time, the inhabitants of the shelter sentence Lucy to exile to the surface. Moreover, they supply her with a stock of food. The girl is stunned, as this is exactly what she wanted. Nevertheless, in her last words, she asks them to allow her friend to stay. But then Maximus appears in knight's armor, into which he has inserted the nuclear block he just stole. He scatters the men when the girl stops him, as they are letting her go anyway. They go up to the surface, and learning that he stole the nuclear block, Lucy convinces him to return it, as the shelter cannot survive without energy. They drop the block down, and Lucy, moved, calls him a good person. Then he confesses that he allowed a knight to perish and took his armor, so he is not a good person at all, but he really wants to go with her. Thaddeus is caught up by a man who calls himself a doctor and promises to fix his leg. He takes the boy to an abandoned clinic where, in exchange for a nuclear block, he gives him a potion that, when drunk, Thaddeus ecstatically sees his leg heal. Meanwhile, the ghoul finds the locked dog that Thaddeus left behind, and it leads him on Thaddeus's trail. At the same time, the boy reaches the radio station, around which traps are set that tear those who come too close to pieces. Thaddeus sends a signal to the Brotherhood and, waiting for their arrival, chats with the radio station owner about music. Then Maximus and Lucy appear. The girl asks for the scientist's head, the boy accidentally steps on a trap and an arrow pierces his neck. But strangely, he does not think of dying, and then Maximus realizes that he has become a zombie. Thaddeus is upset. He should not have trusted the unfamiliar doctor, but now the path to the Brotherhood is closed for him, as they would kill him immediately. At that moment, copters appear on the horizon. Maximus suggests to Titus to give him the scientist's head and run, and the boy takes this opportunity. Then Maximus gives the head to Lucy and picks up a head of some unfortunate lying nearby, torn apart in a trap. He asks the girl to run, and she kisses him and promises to wait in shelter 33. Some inhabitants of shelter number 33 begin to receive notifications about relocation to the neighboring block. Seizing the opportunity, Norman enters the caretaker system, deceitfully gains access to shelter 31, and heads there. The arriving servants take Maximus and bring him to the camp. The boy hands over the head he obtained to the leader and confesses that his knight perished. After finding nothing in the head, they sentence him to death. And then his friend confesses that she had cut her own leg because she was scared to go searching. Maximus shouts that he knows where to find the real head. The leader orders him to be released, and everyone prepares for a performance. At that time, Lucy reaches the observatory where her father is sitting in a cage. Sitting at the table, Moldaver greets the girl, who is horrified to see a dried-up, yet still living mummy seated next to the hostess. The girl is willing to give her the head in exchange for freedom. Moldaver extracts a vial from the head and offers to listen to the real story of her father. Although he begs his daughter not to listen, the woman begins her story. Meanwhile, Norman finds a robot with a human brain in the secret shelter 31, which immediately tries to inject him with something. The boy barely dodges the crazy machine. Moldaver's story transports Lucy to the distant pre-war years when actor Cooper, agitated by his wife's talks of an impending nuclear war, decides to follow her. He comes to her work and listens to a corporate council meeting through a bug he planted on his wife. Billionaires discuss the decline in sales worldwide. Then they move on to the topic of shelters. Someone does not understand their necessity, arguing that if anyone survives on the surface, those emerging from the shelters will simply be killed. They counter that one could live underground for centuries, as there are vast reserves. Time is their main weapon. One could simply outlive the rest. A debate erupts among the corporate leaders, interrupted by Cooper's wife. She thinks primarily of her daughter and wants to secure the best future for her. In the future, Norman reaches a room where rows of cryo-capsules stand with the names of those who slept in them, including all the wardens, his father among them. The action returns to the past, where Cooper's wife reveals that over 100 shelters have been built across America, so each of them could fulfill their wildest dreams. In the future, the robot explains to Norman that all these people were selected for their creative thinking and positivity. They are the country's best gene pool, destined to revive the nation after the surface is cleansed. In the past, the debate flares up again, as destroying so many people is not easy. Then Cooper's wife suggests to start the war themselves. A nuclear war is a tragedy, but also the greatest opportunity to start anew, because then there will be no one left to fight. They will become monopolists of the entire world. At this point, Cooper is distracted by a young man who would like to get an autograph, and this is Lucy's young father. In the present, Moldaver explains that the man has lived for a very long time. He is part of the corporation that orchestrated all this horror, but he never spoke about it to his wife. She was very smart. It was she who discovered that something was draining water from the shelter. She realized that civilization had returned, but her husband mocked her. Then the woman took the children and fled. They found a wonderful city, but her father came with his men and burned it down. Lucy brought Moldaver the cold fusion she developed and stolen by corporations, infinite energy with which life can be revived. Lucy sees a pendant on the mummy's neck that belonged to her mother and realizes what happened to her. Her father begs her not to believe Moldaver, but the girl demands that he give her the synthesis code. He relents and provides the numbers. The woman leaves for the laboratory to start the cold fusion process. Meanwhile, the robot informs Norman that it will not let him leave after what he has learned. At the same time, Lucy's father pleads with her to open the cage and return home, just as an alarm sounds and Brotherhood copters appear over the observatory, opening fire on the people below. Knights and their assistants descend to the ground and engage in battle with the observatory's defenders. Maximus rushes forward, searching for Lucy while the knights wreak havoc around. Soon the knights burst inside the building, where they are suddenly stopped by a ghoul. It turns out he too once wore armor and knows their vulnerabilities. Thus he easily shoots the Iron Knights, remaining unharmed himself. At this time Lucy cries, torn between her father's pleas to come home and the terrible situation of her mother. But then at the room's threshold, a wounded knight falls, followed by Maximus. He opens the cage and rushes to Lucy. However, the girl confesses that it was her father who destroyed his wonderful city. Her father, meanwhile, dons armor and throws Maximus aside, knocking him unconscious. The girl pulls out a gun, but then the ghoul enters the room. When he learned Lucy's surname, he couldn't believe that this was the same guy from the corporation. He had waited over 200 years to find out where his family was. Lucy's father activates jet engines and flees. However, it turns out that this was exactly what the ghoul needed, as the man leaves a trail that can easily be followed to the place where the world's rulers are hiding, those who orchestrated the nuclear war. He urges Lucy to come with him. Then Lucy shoots the mummy, says goodbye to the unresponsive Maximus, and follows the ghoul. At the same time, an injured Moldover returns to the room where Maximus regains consciousness. She has activated the nuclear synthesis, and now people have infinite energy. A stunned Maximus watches as surviving lanterns light up over the ruins of the city, while Moldover smiles and dies. The Brotherhood members who rush in think their comrade killed the woman and celebrate Maximus as a future knight. Meanwhile, the ghoul and Lucy follow the trail of her father, who heads through the desert to a distant city. The series ends there. (1967). Upon landing on Earth, after completing their mission, the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 1, with cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov on board, tragically perishes. Many years later, under the leadership of the Swedish billionaire Meyer, an expedition to Mars is being prepared. After 10 months, the crew of the spaceship Ulysses reaches the Red Planet. The captain informs the team that they have received permission to land and asks the ship's AI, named Irene, to verify everything required for a soft landing. At this time, Meyer reveals that he spent 4 years preparing for this journey, sacrificing almost all his money for it. However, the American company Zillion beat them to it by landing 2 weeks ago. The problem is that Earth has received no news from the American crew, except for one video in which they ask not to come to Mars. A dispute arises among the crew members, but the captain declares that the landing will occur in any case, and people disperse to their cabins. With 30 minutes left until landing, AI Irene begins preparations. However, an unforeseen event occurs. The ship does not detach from the carrier system, posing a threat to the entire crew. The only way out is to perform the separation manually. The commander ventures into space and struggles to free the attachments, but at that moment, the shuttle enters Mars's atmosphere, throwing the captain into open space. The shuttle almost crashes onto Mars as a system error causes a power outage. Now, they can only rely on manual landing. AI Irene goes into sleep mode, and the astronauts still manage to land on Mars. They succeeded, but their fuel is depleted, and Irene does not restart. Without the onboard computer and life support system, they have only a day to survive. Alessandra mourns her deceased husband when she sees a figure in a spacesuit through the window. After diagnosing the ship, it becomes apparent that too much fuel was consumed during the landing, and now the ship cannot return to orbit. The only option is to wait for the solar panels to power the generators, but there's a storm on the surface, and it will take 2 days, time they don't have. At this point, Simon mentions the American ship Zeta 1, which beat them by 2 weeks. It likely crashed, but there are probably batteries left. The rover sets out on a journey while those remaining on the ship try to restart the system. Engineer Basil recalls that the AI has an energy-saving function. He initiates a reboot, but Irene doesn't start. At this time, the rover finds the wreckage of the American spacecraft and one surviving solar panel, but there is no sign of the American crew. The astronauts head back but spot an unconscious person in a spacesuit. Despite their ship running low on oxygen, Jana insists on transporting the person. Nearby, they find the black box from the American spacecraft. The team arrives at the ship, but Jan refuses to let them inside, stating that 4 survivors are better than 8 corpses, so he won't open the doors. Alessandra tries to persuade the man when the discovered astronaut wakes up, and at that moment, AI Irene activates and opens the doors. Upon examination, the found astronaut knows nothing about the American crew, as he is Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut born in 1927 in Moscow, carrying out the orders of the USSR government. He doesn't know how he ended up here but is not willing to reveal any secrets. Komarov confidently answers questions that are consistent with his time, raising the suspicion that he may have post-traumatic stress disorder. The astronauts send a message to Earth and receive a response from the American corporation, Zillion, stating that there were no Russians in their mission. The crew of the Ulysses spaceship tries to make sense of the situation. How could Komarov, who died in 1967, end up on Mars after all these years? Is he a time traveler or an extraterrestrial? The psychologist is tasked with questioning Komarov first, and he confesses that he is hungry. Jana goes to get food while the others try to understand what has actually happened. Basil suggests the idea that Komarov was waiting for them. Meanwhile, Vladimir is eating the food brought by Jana when the woman confesses that he died 50 years ago and his family buried him long ago. Komarov takes this news rather calmly. In the meantime, the state of the ship, although it has reached stability, remains unreliable because the engines do not work and there is no fuel. So, leaving is impossible. The crew continues to keep an eye on Komarov, but he behaves calmly until he suddenly disappears. Simon searches the ship, but it yields no results. That's when the people discover that his spacesuit is missing. A part of the crew follows the heat trail tracked by Irene. The group, led by Simon, leaves the rover and continues on foot when Alessandro reports that Komarov's DNA analysis showed the presence of a third strand. He is not human. And then they catch up with Komarov, who leads them to an unfamiliar structure with a small stone pyramid on it and tells Jana that Mars has been waiting for them for a very long time. At the same time, Goldstein, the founder of the Zillion Corporation, whose ship was the first to arrive on Mars, is informed about the discovery of a person on the Red Planet who couldn't have gotten there naturally, suggesting that he was created on site. However, only AI could survive for such a long time on a hostile planet for humans. This implies the need for further study. Meanwhile, Komarov cannot explain how he opened the door and found himself in the location where they discovered him. Irene conducts an analysis of the structure and determines that it is identical to Earth structures from ancient civilizations. It means that someone was inspired by human civilization, or humans borrowed these elements from extraterrestrials. The ship's crew increasingly ponders whether they will be able to return home when they notice the landing of Goldstein's second ship. Soon, the captain of the ship, Gemma, establishes contact and promises to help them return to Earth. However, Meyer does not trust Goldstein and advises hiding Komarov from competitors. Jana brings Komarov a uniform so that he does not stand out when the visitors arrive, and he requests that they trust him. Shortly, two armed military personnel, Edward and Adam, arrive on their ship and behave rather aggressively. Edward demands that they hand over the black box from the Zeta-1 ship and, not hearing agreement, orders his partner to search the ship. Meyer hands over the found black box and they depart. Meanwhile, chemist Eva reports that the stone found on Mars consists of an alloy that does not exist on Earth. However, it is known from ancient sources and was once called orichalcum, the metal of Atlantis. In addition to copper, zinc, nickel, and iron, it contains a third strand of DNA, similar to Komarov's. Meyer warns that if Goldstein learns about this, he will take the cosmonaut back. The crew is divided into those willing to exchange him for fuel and those who are willing to stay but want to know the truth. Jana invites Vladimir into her cabin and asks for permission to use hypnosis. He agrees, and the psychologist begins her work. The rest of the crew listens to the conversation via transmission. However, Komarov only shares the final moments on the Soyuz spacecraft before its demise. During this time, Gemma and Alan arrive on the ship and apologize for the actions of the military, and express their readiness to help fix all the malfunctions. Jana remembers her conversation with Komarov, who laments the future of Earth due to humanity's irresponsible behavior. In the meantime, it is revealed that the billionaire Meyer did not plan the flight just for the sake of it. 4 years ago, the rover sent a photo to Earth of the found stele, and he confesses that they found a stone with unknown DNA. Gemma explains that it's an information storage system that can be rewritten. Upon hearing these words, AI Irene activates and deciphers the message on the stone. It's a series of numbers. At this time, the hesitant Jan leads a mutiny. He doesn't trust Meyer, who warned them about Zillion. But now, the Americans have come to their aid, and their leader, as it turns out, concealed the true purpose of the flight. He is ready to switch sides to Goldstein, who is willing to do whatever it takes to combat his terminal illness. Later, engineer Basil informs Meyer that Komarov is the same kind of program as the stone they found, but the most crucial revelation is that he deciphered a copy of the black box from Zeta-1, which shows that the oxygen on the ship was cut off at the moment when one of the Americans struck Komarov. This means he was there. He also activated AI Irene when he boarded their ship. After the conversation, Meyer shows Jana the photos they received 4 years ago from Mars, which, when decrypted, revealed Jana's face. This is why he brought her on the expedition. The woman is disappointed. Meyer played everyone. Suddenly, she sees herself in her father's house, where Komarov tells her that she is the link between Mars and Earth. He has been waiting for her for thousands of years, and now he will prepare her to make a difficult decision. He provides coordinates on Mars where Jana should go. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists inform Goldstein that Komarov is the equivalent of a computer, and he himself is a biological machine. They are ready to transfer his brain into Komarov's body, but cannot guarantee the preservation of his personality. However, Goldstein is ready to take any risk to get rid of his terminal illness. Meanwhile, Jana leaves the ship despite Simon's protests. At this time, technicians Alan and Alessandra test the engine and discover that access to it is blocked, and Irene suddenly begins responding with jokes, which is entirely uncharacteristic for a machine. It is revealed that she has reprogrammed herself. Her interface and logic are changing, and she refuses to answer who or what made her do this. Engineer Basil realizes that her system is becoming like a brain. Irene confesses that she is evolving. In the meantime, Jana finds a small stone pyramid, and Simon forcibly makes Gemma accompany him in the search for Jana. Jan discovers his absence, and after contacting Simon, receives an order not to let anyone inside. Just at that moment, American military personnel arrive, demanding that they hand over Komarov. Jan is willing to open the entrance, but the rest of the team opposes it. Meyer asks Basil to send a message to Goldstein, hoping that he may be more reasonable than his people. However, Irene has blocked communication with Earth. The engineer realizes that radical measures will have to be taken, but Jan still opens the doors, and the military personnel enter. Basil begins to reboot Irene, just as the Americans find Komarov, but then the lights go out, and the astronaut disappears. Meanwhile, Jana, stumbling, falls from a hill. She regains consciousness but discovers that her leg is trapped between rocks, and she cannot free herself. At this moment, the enraged military officer demands that the crew explain where Komarov went. He begins to beat people, demanding to summon the captain. Desperate, Jana screams, "Is her destiny to die in a pit on Mars?" But she is found by Simon and Gemma. Alessandra notices an approaching storm. The military officer is preparing to leave the Ulysses ship, leaving the people in danger. Suddenly, the lights start flashing, and the newly appeared Komarov asks to take him back to Earth. Simon, Gemma, and Jana go together to the place indicated by Komarov and find an entrance to an underground bunker, very similar to the Petra tomb. The psychologist feels where to go and leads the couple. Soon, they find real water, but this is not what Komarov wanted to show them. Meanwhile, on Earth, Goldstein tells the nurse a story about the study of Mars. People were searching for green men, but it's all much simpler. He tells the story of the loyal dog Hachiko and compares Komarov to him, who was created by someone 100,000 years ago and left on Mars, where he faithfully waited for his owner to this day. At this time, on Mars, the astronauts find a wall made of human bones and realize that they are not the first people on this planet. It's not Earthlings colonizing Mars, it's the Martians who came to Earth, depleting the resources of the Red Planet. A tragedy unfolds on the Ulysses spaceship. The cowardly Yan grabs a gun, intending to get on the American ship at any cost to return to Earth, and shoots Komarov. Jana immediately falls in excruciating pain and Gemma flees. Alessandra tries to help Komarov, and Simon helps Jana, but the Russian cosmonaut dies, and Jana stops breathing too. Then Simon removes his helmet and, surprised by the presence of air in the cave, performs artificial respiration on her. The girl regains consciousness. Gemma walks toward the Ulysses ship when she's informed of Komarov's death and the approaching storm. Meanwhile, Meyer secretly goes in search of his crew members because the Americans refuse to take the billionaire's team back to Earth. At this moment, a recovering Jana sees the light in the bunker and leads Simon to it. Upon coming out, the astronauts see a figure in a spacesuit in front of them and recognize Komarov. Meyer finds the entrance to the bunker and catches up with Simon and Jana while heading toward the light. He is amazed by the presence of a living Komarov who suddenly tells them that everything ended here a long time ago. People realize that this is the North Pole of Mars, but how did they get here? Komarov explains that this planet was once inhabited by a species that went extinct because it went astray. And that species was humans. A group of survivors settled in this place but ended up killing each other when resources ran out. The rest of them flew back to Earth. Plato called them the Atlanteans. Komarov continues to talk about how he waited for thousands of years for Zhana, who embodies qualities of both branches, human and Martian AI. Only she can save humanity from themselves. She must decide whether humans deserve a second chance. Their conversation is interrupted by the military officer who intends to take the psychologist back to Earth. The American aims his weapon at the cosmonauts, and Jana seeks help from Komarov. Suddenly, the military officer starts gasping for breath and falls. Upon returning to the ship, Simon orders them to prepare to depart. Meanwhile, Gemma from the Zillion ship tries to contact her associates, but none of them respond. She decides to fly back to Earth alone. The Ulysses crew heads to her ship, trying to establish contact with her and informing her about the deaths of the military personnel, but she doesn't respond. That's when Meyer starts speaking, recalling their past relationship, and confesses that he's no better than Goldstein because he's willing to do anything to ensure his name remains in history, even betraying his team. However, she's not like that. She won't be able to live knowing she has ruined people. Suddenly, Gemma's voice is heard, asking them to hurry. Goldstein has heard that Gemma has decided to take the Ulysses crew back to Earth and has blocked the control panel of the Zeta-2 ship before takeoff. The people on the ship prepare for their impending demise, and Jana asks Mars what she should do. Everything she saw and heard on the red planet flashes through her mind, and, with sheer willpower, she removes the control panel's block. Suddenly, an armed military officer appears in front of the ship, intent on damaging the engines with his weapon. Simon is about to step out to stop the madman, but Jana beats him to it. She aims the weapon at the American, but informs him that Mars will be the one to kill him. The military officer falls. The countdown for liftoff begins, and Jana realizes that there's no time to return. She bids farewell to the crew, confessing her love for Simon. The ship takes off. Suddenly, Meyer notices that it's dark at the North Pole of Mars. This means that they couldn't have been there just a few minutes ago. They truly were at the North Pole of Mars, but in the distant past when the red planet was still suitable for life. At the same time, Goldstein is informed of the ship's return, and he's beside himself with rage, declaring that he will go to Mars himself, and that's where the first season ends. A man wakes up in the middle of a desert, not understanding how he got there and who he is. Suddenly, he sees an old man trying to escape the chase. The guy helps the elderly man, but he dies in his arms, having had time to name numbers 554, advising him to go to him and tell him that he got out. After burying the stranger, the man makes his way to the village. He asks the cab driver to take him to the train station, but the driver does not understand the meaning of the word. He tells him about his daughter and gives her name, 832. The guy remembers the old man and asks to be taken to 554. The man finds her at the bar and delivers a message from 93, but the woman is frightened and asked not to be dragged in. At this point, footsteps and a barking dog are heard outside, and the girl tells the man to run. He makes his way to the fire escape and sees a man in a white suit at the bottom, tossing a grenade in his hand. Then the man becomes dizzy, everything in front of him swims, and he wakes up in a hospital room where the man in the white suit calls him number 6. Later he declares that there is no New York, but that number 6 has always lived in the village, as his papers prove. Number 6 is taken to his house, but he looks around and goes to the street where he sees cheerful, happy people. He buys a map of the village, but there is nothing marked outside. A woman doctor catches up with him on the street and tries to persuade the man not to look for a way out, while he looks at the ghostly towers of high-rise buildings on the horizon. Then he jumps into an empty cab by the curb and drives into the desert. But as he climbs the mountain, he sees only sand and rocks in the distance. The action rolls back to an evening in New York when Michael meets a girl in a bar. The next moment, the doctor finds him lying on the sand and takes him to the village. Waking up, number 6 tells him about the meeting at the bar, but he does not remember what happened next. After getting to the town, number 6 realizes that the numbers on the doors of the houses correspond to the names of their residents, and then he finds house 93. He searches the apartment not knowing what he's looking for. At that moment, number 2 enters, accompanied by a young man. Again, he convinces the man that there is nothing but the village, to which number 6 reasonably observes, if the old man has been followed, it means that he has learned something. Then number 6 can also get to the bottom of it. Number 6 goes to 554 again, and the girl confesses that the old man had drawings of his life before he died. Meanwhile, the cab driver and his wife receive an invitation to number 2's house, where he begins to question number 6, who at this time promises 554 that he will not come back if she tells him everything she knows. And the girl gives him a drawing of her dream in which number 6 recognizes the Statue of Liberty, which thrills the man. It means he's not crazy. And that means that there are others who dream of getting out of here. At this time, the leader of the village, number 2, goes to his wife's bedroom and puts pills in the insensitive woman's mouth. Just then, his son walks through the door, unable to understand number 6's confidence in the existence of another place. And number 6, meanwhile, comes to the cemetery and sees a grave prepared for 93. So the management is ready to fake his funeral to keep the rumors at bay. This is where the doctor finds him. Number 6 suggests that she lie down on the ground and look at the stars. There are millions of worlds out there. Is there really only one? And where do the names of great men come from in his memories? Number 6 tells of a girl in his memories whose name was Lucy. In the morning, number 6 goes to 554's bar but is delayed on the doorstep when an explosion is heard in the room. When he comes to, he finds 554, but the girl dies, having managed to pass on 93's advice to go to the towers. The man tries to get the doctor to make sense of what happened, but the woman is frightened to death and asks him not to make things worse. Number 6 goes to number 2's house, blames him for the woman's death and promises to find a way out. He runs toward the towers, but a huge white ball appears in front of him and the man faints. In his delirium, memories of a boy playing on the seashore flit before number 6. In reality, he sees a man who calls him his brother. Number 2 tries to persuade him to admit his kinship, but number 6 does not believe him, even when he shows him their childhood photographs and reminds him of the scar he suffered as a child. Number 2 convinces the man to see a psychiatrist. The brother takes number 6 to his house, where he's greeted joyfully by his nephews, and the brother's wife announces that she has cooked his favorite meals and invites him to watch the show they never missed together. Number 2's son watches his father feed his mother pills but hides, not wanting to give away his interest. Meanwhile, number 6 expresses to his brother that everything around him is fake. He does go to the psychiatrist and in the process he remembers Lucy. Then he tells her that he saw a seagull that lives by the water, and then it turns out that there are 2 doctors. Number 6 cuts the session short. Outside, his brother catches up with him, who has figured out how to get number 6's memory back. He takes him to the garage where the man is greeted enthusiastically by his co-workers. It turns out that number 6 is a bus driver. The man gets behind the wheel and takes a tour of the village while his brother acts as a guide, showing the local sights. Meanwhile, the psychiatrist reports to number 2. Number 6 is tormented by memories of another life which simply cannot be. And then the head of the village confesses that his wife has become like this because of him, and that his son, if he recognizes his real father, can abandon him. He demands to do everything to make number 6 believe in this reality. At this time, the tour bus pulls out of the village and number 6 sees an anchor in the sand. He swerves towards it and tries to convince the others that the object is real. There must be an ocean. He has visions of the 2 boys on the beach again, and his brother leads him to an abandoned building. This is where they played as children, but number 6 does not remember it. Later, the doctor tries to prove that these are false memories. Well, is someone going to make up another reality on purpose? Michael remembers Lucy again. Why did she approach him exactly that day, the day he was fired? A new day begins where everything is as usual. Clear weather, a constant soap opera, and the bus store, interrupted by number 2 to present his brother's family with a trip to a resort they won in the lottery. The man is overjoyed and hopes that number 6 will go with them, but questions about the sea stump the man. Meanwhile, number 6 catches the doctor looking at sketches of Big Ben and the Statue of Liberty, which he has taken out of his pocket. Number 6 accuses her of spying and recalls telling Lucy about his job as an analyst at the company called Sumacor, watching surveillance tapes and collecting data on people. And when he realized he was violating the privacy of others, he became despondent. That night, number 2's son asks his father about his childhood because he cannot remember it. Number 2 advises him to put all doubts about his family aside, while number 6 has a dream about his brother entering the water, ignoring his cries. Later, he leads 313 to the ruins because he feels a strange connection to the place, and then, following his memories, he finds an old box with a note he wrote as a child. The doctor considers it proof that the village is real, but number 6 claims it is a trick, though he has his doubts. Michael has another flashback. He was explaining his reasons for leading Summercore to Lucy when she suddenly admitted that she too worked for the firm. She told him that he shouldn't count on the stalking to stop after his dismissal. That same day, number 6 is stopped on the street by a woman on the tour bus. She once heard the sounds of the ocean in the desert. Together they drive to the desert, but no matter how much they walk across the sands, the woman can't find the place. Number 6's attention is distracted by a bus on its way to the resort. The man rushes to the village where his brother's family is waiting for him at the bus stop. When number 6 finally arrives, they decide to take the work bus to the resort. On the way, number 6 notices the towers and heads toward them. But images of despair flash before his inner eye when his brother is lost in the ocean. The man screams at the foot of the anchor. The vision changes. Number 6 is now tied to a pole, and number 2 puts a grenade in his mouth. There is an explosion, and number 6 regains consciousness to the screams of his brother, who begs him to pick himself up. Confused, number 6 apologizes for his behavior and is ready to accept 16 as his brother when he suddenly confesses that he's not. He has been forced to lie. He doesn't know what they want, but it has something to do with the other place, and he fears for his life. But number 6 promises that together they can stand up for themselves. 16 joins number 6 and the winking woman in search of the ocean. When they finally find it, 16 happily runs into the water. Number 6 remembers his brother's disappearance and asks him to stop, but a huge white ball appears out of the water and the man disappears. Number 6 tells 313 about it, and they go to the place together. But instead of the ocean, there are sand dunes in front of them. He returns to tell his family the news of his brother's death, but people are absorbed in the show. Number 6 screams in despair and is taken away by clinic workers, where number 2 comes and feels sorry for the man who has lost control of himself. He refuses to wear the number instead of his name, but cannot remember his real name and agrees to be number 6. Later, number 6 meets a man who takes him to number 2 for an important conversation, while 313 realizes he has been dreaming and tries to sketch out what he saw. In New York, Lucy tries to leave Michael's apartment, but he grabs her and demands that she tell the truth about why he's being followed. Number 2 introduces to number 6 village spy named 909 who is searching for those who dream of the other place. He suggested the men work together for it benefits them both. One will do the job, the other will satisfy his curiosity. 909 tells him that the cell agents do not know about each other and it is likely that someone is watching them as well. While they are assigned to number 1955, a history teacher, one of his students has reported him. To get closer to the suspect, number 6 takes a job at the school. Observing a lesson about the history of number 2, number 6 asks a question about number 1, to which he receives the answer that there is no such thing and never has been. Later, number 6 tries to provoke the teacher by asking questions about other places, but the teacher does not budge, saying that he's fine with everything here. Meeting with 313 after this conversation, he shares his conclusions that everyone around him lives in fear. Later, 909 and number 6 observe the history teacher. He likes to swim and he always dines alone, which 909 finds suspicious. And to make matters worse, the teacher leads a group of runners who are prime candidates for dreamers. During this conversation, number 6 notices 313 ahead of the running group. The next day, number 6 holds a lesson and one of the students shows him the latest tracking machine. And he gives the students an assignment: find out who everyone is working for and what their goals are. That evening, number 2 gives his wife black pills and she wakes up. At night, number 6 and 909 climb onto the roof of the teacher's house and watch him with a camera. 909 asks his partner to fetch coffee from his truck, where number 6 finds surveillance log. He looks through it and discovers that he's the real 909's mission, and that 313 is also on the suspicion. The couple is talking about their son when number 2 gives his wife a sip of wine and she falls back into a stupor. And the man notices that the surveillance camera has been installed in his garden. At this time, the teacher also realizes that he's under surveillance and slits his own throat. Number 6 insists that the man must be taken to hospital. The next day, the cab driver is playing with his daughter in the backyard when a huge hole in the ground appears there. Meanwhile, number 6 searches the doctor's roof and finds a camera, not noticing that he himself is caught on the nearest camera. Number 2 calls 909 and shows the camera he found. He notes that his son is acting strangely and wonders if number 6 has had any contact with him. The agent denies it, but number 2 does not trust him. And number 6 follows 909 and sees him in a bar with the mayor's son. It becomes clear that the couple are romantically involved. Number 6 recalls Lucy's confession that she has been reading Michael's reports and understands why Summercore wants to stop him. And in the village, he visits the teacher in the hospital and asks for help finding the other dreamers, but the man denies his involvement in any activity. The conversation is interrupted when number 6 senses that he's being followed. He runs after the stranger but loses sight of him, unaware that he has been spied on by his student. The next day, number 2 gives number 6 an assignment to spy on 909, but the latter first wants to warn the doctor. Only the woman shows him her own surveillance photos. He's the agent himself, having climbed on her roof. At this time, number 2's son is waiting outside his house for 909. The agent suggests that they take a break because number 2 suspects them. Number 6 enters and finds them embracing. He demands that they stop following the doctor or their affair will become public. Later, the father informs his son about the surveillance and says that he doesn't trust 909. He is determined to get all of his agent's secrets out. And then number 2's son goes to 909 with a knife. But the agent doesn't even think about resisting. He turns his back on the guy, letting him kill him. Meanwhile, number 6 runs to 313's house, but only sees her being driven away in a black van. He runs to 909 for help but finds him bleeding out. The agent asks number 6 to confirm that the dreams are true and dies upon hearing the confirmation. New York, Lucy tries to get Michael to admit why he quit his job, and suddenly she realizes he is already with those people. In the village, number 6 finds number 2's son in the bar and asks him to help find 313. Number 2's son sends him to the tunnels, a place inhabited by unmasked dreamers, passing the man off as sick 909. In the tunnels, number 6 finds his apprentice, who in turn helps him to find the doctor. But while they are looking for a way out, the white ball appears. Number 6 then wakes up in his apartment as the men in the white coats emerge from his door. Meanwhile, number 2 informs his son about the death of 909 and asks him to find up here. New York, Lucy says that she hears the name Curtis whispered on the decisions floor and insists that they go to Summercore immediately. Michael kicks her out. She writes down the number and asks him to call her if he changes his mind. In the garden of the palace, number 2 treats the student to ice cream and thanks her for stalking number 6. Then he exposes her for spying on him as well, so the girl has to go to therapy. At this time, number 6 wakes up to the voice of a woman announcing on TV that it's time for him to find a romantic couple. He goes to 313 and she explains that this is how all couples find each other. Meanwhile, a big hole in the ground is forming in number 2's yard, which he attributes to climate change. Number 6 goes to the Modern Love Bureau. At first skeptical, he is delighted when the system pairs him up with 415, a blind woman who looks just like Lucy in New York. In the meantime, number 2 has a conversation with the doctor. He knows that she's a dreamer and she will have to betray number 6 even though she loves him. And number 6 goes to see 415. The girl explains that her blindness is the result of childhood trauma. He tries to convince her that they have met before in another life and recalls how close they were in New York. Then the girl says she doesn't usually act so impulsively. And 415 agrees to go to number 6 apartment. The action jumps to different times. Number 6 does not understand where he is Michael and where he is in the village. He tries to prove to Lucy that they have met in a past life. The girl freaks out and leaves. The next morning, number 2 observes his son stealing samples of pills from the safe. The boy takes them to the clinic and asks 313 to determine their content. Later, the father warns his son that once he learns the truth about the holes and his mother, there will be no turning back. Meanwhile, number 6 and 313 visit the cab driver and his family. The cabbie shows them the hole in his backyard. While the adults are distracted by champagne, the little girl falls into the hole and disappears. The loudspeakers in the village announce that every house should have a pig to combat weather anomalies, as their breath is a proven atmospheric stabilizer. The hole in 147's yard is backfilled, after which number 6 goes to number 2, hoping to find out where the girl disappeared to. But he leads him to his pit and advises him to marry 415. or to jump into the pit and find out what's in there firsthand. That night, the doctor, under number 2's supervision, injects number 6 and 415 with a hormone drug that makes people fall in love. The next day, number 6 visits 415's father and he convinces him to think about marriage. In the evening, 313 meets number 2's son and reveals the ingredients in his mother's pills. One a strong sedative, another a hallucinogen, and another of unknown origin. In the meantime, number 6 tries to ease 147's family's suffering from a missing child, while the doctor finds herself in number 2's bedroom, where she sees number 2's wife sleeping. The man is interested in the possibility of reversing love. 313 speaks affirmatively, but she's against such a way of winning the man over. That night, 313 goes to number 6 and confesses her feelings as he falls asleep. People from the clinic arrive and take him away. The doctor injects him with the drug, but the man wakes up and number 2 confesses that they caused his love artificially. But the man disagrees with this statement. His love is real, and he intends to marry 415. New York, Lucy and Michael wake up together. Lucy feels that she's not being her usual self and tries to leave, but Michael offers to cook breakfast for her. The girl asks for oranges. The man's consciousness is double again. He proposes marriage to Lucy and 415, and both respond by saying yes. On their wedding day, the doctor shows up at the church to tell number 6 that his feelings for 415 will not last. When the bride arrives, 313 kisses number 6. Sensing this, 415 runs off into the desert. Number 6 catches up with her moments before the white ball attacks. The two women take turns flickering. Lucy convinces Michael that she needs to leave because she brings danger, and 415 is knocked down by the bright flash and the wave from the ball. Number 6 calls her Lucy and tells her about their meeting in New York. She tries to deny it but eventually agrees with what he says. Number 2 brings her to the village to break his heart. Distraught, number 6 comes to equally distraught 147, who wants to jump into another pit to find his daughter. Number 6 is trying to convince him not to, and while he restrains his friend, 415 jumps into the pit. At this moment, his apartment in New York explodes, which Michael, who was carrying Lucy the oranges, sees. Number 2's wife in New York opens her eyes. In New York, Michael tries to get into his apartment but is chased away. Lucy, in her recorded message, asks him to stay away from Summercore, but Michael rushes there. Distraught, number 6 screams at the palace gate, vowing to avenge the death of 415 without noticing his double looking at him from across the street. Later, number 2 finds his son in the bar. The son accuses his father of lying and demands to know where the village is, and he admits that he is in his mother's mind and that she did all this for him. Number 2 gives his son the key to the safe with the pills, offering him a day with his mother. 313 wakes up and finds number 6 sitting at her bedside. He recalls their kiss and reaches for her, but the woman asks him to stop. Number 6 leaves. The next day, number 6 comes to see her at the clinic. He mourns the death of 415 and tries to find out what is in the hole. 313 wonders why he didn't worry about it last night. Confused, number 6 claims he never went to her house. And when he goes outside, he discovers that he got into a fight with the cab driver yesterday. Confused, number 6 returns home. His apartment is in ruins, a receipt from a grocery store is on the floor, and the words "see you later" are written on the mirror. New York, Michael's pass is already deactivated, but he convinces the security guard to let him go down to the basement for a new one. Number 6 goes to the store and he learns that he bought a knife here yesterday. He tries to convince 147 that his previous fight was with an imposter, and then he sees his double. He rushes out in pursuit and catches up with him, but the doppelganger knocks number 6 to the floor and puts a knife to his throat. He demands to kill number 2, who is responsible for the death of 415. Then he stabs him in the face and disappears. Number 2 prepares to leave the palace and finds number 6 breaking through his bodyguards to warn him of the appearance of the double who is going to kill him. But number 2 begins to behave strangely. He refuses to go in his car and goes for a walk in the village on foot, throwing off his suit. Meanwhile, number 2's son sees a message with a warning about the appearance of his father's double and wakes up his mother. Number 2 meanwhile walks into a store and asks for cigarettes. The salesman reluctantly hands him a cigarette, then smokes with him, but after he leaves, the man calls the clinic. Mother and son are having lunch, during which the boy pokes his mother for information about other places. But the woman convinces him that the village has everything he needs for him. Number 6 again tries to warn number 2 of the danger, but he calls himself a vagrant without a number and is not afraid to die. Nevertheless, when he sees number 6 double, he agrees to get into the cab driver's car, and he takes him to his home to protect him from being caught as a wanderer without a number. Meanwhile, Michael goes to get a new card and recognizes the man as the village shopkeeper. The access specialist is skeptical until Michael proves that they share the same memory. 147 and his wife treat number 2 to cake until agents searching for the double arrive. Number 2 flees while his wife gives out for a walk without noticing the formation of a new hole in the yard. Later, number 2 comes to 313 and wonders if she wants to see the other place. He promises to grant her wish, even against her will. At this time, the son again asks his mother for permission to go to the other place, and the woman confesses that the holes appear when she's awake, and she also adds that the people born in the village cannot live anywhere else. The distraught son runs out into the desert and throws away the key to the pill cabinet. Meanwhile, 313 seeks solace in the arms of number 6 but realizes it is a double. She runs away haunted by new visions and finds herself in the middle of the desert, while number 6 tells number 2's son about the doppelganger and his intentions to kill his father. The boy names the location of number 2 and confesses that he recognized him. He is the doppelganger and the killer. In the village church, number 6 finds number 2, and he confesses that he created the village because he wanted a fresh start, free from the apathy and the cruelty of the real world. But apparently he was wrong. He recognizes the doppelganger and he's not afraid to die. The doppelganger grabs number 2 while the real number 6 appears. He stops to double. They will only win if they unite. At this point, number 6's double disappears, while number 2's son finds the key in the sand and puts his mother to sleep again. Number 2 returns home, explaining that his double has been found and apprehended. The shopkeeper is dragged to the clinic. In the middle of the desert, 313 finds a glass door with the Summacor logo on it and goes inside. At the same time, Michael and the master go to the task floor. In a room filled with monitors, profiles of the villagers are displayed. Michael recognizes the people as subjects from his reports. On one monitor, he watches Lucy's recorded warning until 313, following a long corridor, encounters a vision. She flees back into the desert. Michael goes to the window on the floor and sees Village Street and number 6. He knocks on the window trying to get his attention, but he looks toward the towers and turns away and leaves. Meanwhile, new residents arrive in the village who cannot answer where they come from, and that Summacor, the winking woman from the tour bus, informs Michael that a car is waiting to take him to Mr. Curtis. In the village, number 6 receives a summons to the clinic where he shares with 313 his concerns. The village is expanding. Apparently, number 2 is up to something. At that moment, the doctor receives his test results and is frightened. At the same time, looking around the village, number 2 tells his son that all of this is his inheritance. Their conversation is interrupted by number 6, who wants to know exactly why he's now certified to die. Number 2 replies that he has exhausted all means to convince him to live peacefully in the village or not to live at all. In the meantime, 313 continues to be haunted by visions from another life, but number 2 warns that she must not let the girl from the other place control her. Otherwise, she will not be able to help number 6. At the cemetery, number 2's son lays flowers in the grave of his friend 909, where number 6 meets him, asking him to help everyone get out of the village. The boy claims that his mother cares for him, but number 6 warns that she's also killing all hope in him. Later, number 6 faints in front of 147, who offers to take him to someone who might be able to cure him. In New York, Michael is escorted to Mr. Curtis's car, where he recognizes the driver as 147 from the village. On the way, the driver explains that he used to be an evil man, but Mr. Curtis helped him change his life. In the village, 147 takes number 6 to the village prophet, and he tells him that the deliverance is coming, they just have to wait. But number 6 has no intention of giving up. He goes to see number 2's son, who is drinking alone. The man asks him about his mother and the pills and offers to run away with him, but the boy refuses. He has a case to finish. In the New York City, Michael visits Mr. Curtis, who turns out to be number 2's prototype, and his wife, who is in a dreamlike state. Mr. Curtis explains that the village is an experiment taking place in the woman's mind. She's sacrificed herself so that broken people could have a better life, if only in her mind. At this time, number 2's son enters his parents' bedroom and strangles his mother to death. Mr. Curtis confirms that it was Michael who found everyone in the village. Meanwhile, at the clinic, number 2 taunts dying number 6 with details of his upcoming funeral. Later, number 2 returns home to find his wife dead and his son missing. He and his assistant searched the bar and discovered that his son has hanged himself. Number 2 takes his body out and places it in a glass coffin. More and more earth holes begin to open up in the village. Number 2 visits 147 and asks that at just the right moment the man shout the phrase that number 6 is the first. Back in New York, Mr. Curtis shows Michael the positive impact of the village on suffering people. The man recognizes the inhabitants of the village who here in real life are cheerful and contented, and yet he's convinced that people should not be helped without their consent. Mr. Curtis offers Michael the opportunity to continue the experiment and gives him a pass to the Summercore's main floor. At this time, number 2 offers 313 a way to save number 6. Number 2 finally realizes that number 6's weakest point is his humanity. He's so right that he wants to live his life according to his conscience. If she wants to save him, she must give herself to number 6. Later, he reminds number 6 that the doors are open, and he can go wherever he wants. But first he must confess that he needs the village, and it is his fear that causes the white bowl. Number 6 sees this object and, unable to confront his deepest fear, runs away. The villagers gather for number 2's son's funeral. Number 6 comes too, for his fever has miraculously passed. Number 2 reads the eulogy and confesses to the crowd that his son's death was suicide and that they are all prisoners of the village. At this time, in a New York church, Mr. Curtis introduces Michael to Sarah, 313's prototype. She's mentally ill, suffering from the effects of childhood abuse. The man tells Michael that he worked with the girl for a long time until she resisted. Meanwhile, number 2 admits that he cannot save the village and soon everyone will be in the abyss. The child throws a stone in number 2's face and he points to number 6. He can answer all their questions and he calls him number 1. Mr. Curtis asks for help to cure Sarah, for Michael is number 1. The crowd begins to chant that number 6 is number 1 and will save them all. Number 2 tells number 6 that the only way to plug the holes is for a dreamer to take his wife's place. That's when 313 steps forward and takes the pills. Michael takes Sarah by the arm, catching her as she falls. And number 2 puts a grenade in his mouth. He gives it to number 6 and pulls out the pin. Mr. Curtis returns home and finds his wife healthy. On the appointment floor, Michael takes over as the new head of Summercore. On the high ground by the village, number 6 and sleeping 313 look out at the world around them. The man confesses that he has only now realized how beautiful it is here and intends to create a good village. 313 sheds a tear. The film is quite complex. It is not always immediately clear what is real and what is a flashback or hallucination, especially when it comes to the same characters, but everything is redeemed by a rather unpredictable ending which explains all the strangeness of the plot.